You've been told your whole life who you are. Your name, your gender, your age, your roles, student, friend, spouse, provider, the one who laughs at these things, cries at those things, gets nervous here, feels confident there, a collection of traits, preferences, opinions, reactions, each one stitched into you by someone else's needle. And so you believed it, you wore it, you practiced it. And after all this time you forgot something important. You didn't choose any of it. You didn't choose your language. You didn't choose the first words you heard, the sounds your tongue would wrap itself around. You didn't choose the faces that first smiled at you, the culture that told you what was good or evil, what was polite or disgusting, what was sacred or shameful. Long before you understood what a choice even was, you were already programmed. And yet, you walk around thinking you're making choices. You say, "This is just who I am," as if that statement were a declaration of freedom. But what if it's not? What if it's a confession of conditioning? What if all the things you think define you, your preferences, your beliefs, your personality, aren't really you at all, but adaptations you made to survive in a system you didn't design? Right now you probably feel like you're the one thinking your thoughts, that there's a thinker behind them, someone sitting at the center of your mind, pushing levers and pulling strings, directing attention like a conductor. But pause. Ask yourself, where is that thinker? Can you find it? Is it behind your eyes, in your chest, in your brain? Or is it just a story the brain tells to explain its own motion? Because the truth is more disorienting than you might be ready for. You are not the one thinking your thoughts. Thoughts arise, spontaneously. From where? Who knows? But certainly not from some central you that authors each sentence. Your thoughts appear like lightning cracks across a dark sky. You didn't choose the next one, and you can't even predict it. You don't think your thoughts. You hear them, just like you hear the sound of the wind. And that voice inside your head? The one that seems so convincingly like it belongs to you, the one narrating your life, rationalizing your actions, telling you how to feel about what just happened, that voice is not you. It's an echo, an amalgamation, a mimic of all the voices you've ever heard. Parents, teachers, media, strangers' fears, a rehearsed echo of memory dressed up in your accent. But here's the twist. Just because it sounds like you doesn't mean it is you. If you can observe a thought, you cannot be that thought. If you can observe your beliefs, your reactions, your stories, then who is the observer? Who is watching the performance unfold from behind the curtain? The mind wants to scream out, but if I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? And that's where the fear creeps in. Because to strip away what you think you are is to stand naked before the void. A terrifying openness, a field with no name. And yet, this is where the truth begins, not in answers, but in the willingness to ask a question you don't already know how to answer. Everything you believe about who you are was formed in an environment you didn't control. From the moment you were born, your brain began constructing a self-model, not because it was true, but because it was useful, a shortcut, a map, not the territory. This self-model, this idea of me, is just a practical illusion, a way for your organism to track memory, assign emotion, anticipate danger, interact with others. It's a function, not a fact. Imagine that for a moment. You, as you know yourself, are not a fixed being. You are a process, a story unfolding, a stream of experience constantly rewriting itself, pretending to be a solid object. You are not the page. You are the pen stroke being written as the story moves forward. And what does that mean? It means that the identity you defend, protect, and explain isn't real in the way you think it is. It's a beautiful fiction. And like all good fiction, it feels true. It moves you. It hurts you. It excites you. But it isn't you. Take a moment now. Reflect on something you used to believe about yourself that no longer feels true. Maybe you once thought you were shy, or broken, or worthless. Maybe you used to believe you couldn't change. But now, from where you are today, you see that was just a chapter, not the whole book. If that belief changed, then it was never fundamental. It was never you. It was something you wore for a while and then outgrew. And if you can outgrow one part of the self, you can outgrow any part. That's the secret. You are not the contents of your mind. You are the canvas upon which those contents appear and disappear. You are not the emotion. You are the presence that feels it. You are not the belief. You are the space in which belief arises and passes away. You are not the character. You are the awareness watching the character live its life. And here's the most shattering part. You are not separate from the world around you. You are not an isolated dot moving through space. You are a momentary expression of the whole thing. The wave thinks it's separate from the ocean until it remembers what it's made of. So what if you stopped defending the wave? What if you allowed yourself to dissolve back into the ocean of being, not as an idea, but as a direct experience, a deep knowing that cannot be spoken, only lived? This is not about rejecting your life, your story, your emotions. It's about seeing them clearly, holding them lightly, understanding that they are happening, but they are not you. Because once you see this, truly see it, you stop taking it all so personally. You stop clinging to every thought like it's your identity. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to be fixed. And in that letting go, something extraordinary happens. You become free. Free to explore instead of perform. Free to feel instead of explain. Free to change instead of defend. Free to live instead of just maintaining the illusion of a self. So now the question isn't, who am I? The real question is, what am I without this story? And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real you begins to speak. Not with words, but with silence, with presence, with a kind of sacred stillness that was always there, just waiting for you to listen. There's a voice speaking in your mind right now. It sounds like you. It uses your language, your tone, your emotional cadence. It comments on what you're doing, reminds you of what to worry about, narrates your mistakes, replays conversations that already happened, and imagines ones that never will. Sometimes it whispers doubts. Sometimes it screams. Sometimes it sounds like your parents. Sometimes it mimics the voice of someone who hurt you, but almost always it goes unquestioned. You've spent so long identifying with it, assuming it is you, that you've never stopped to ask the most important question: who is listening to it? That voice inside your head isn't you, it's not your essence. It's not your soul, it's not the truest part of you, it's a simulation, a neural puppet, a clever trick of evolution, a mental habit built to maintain continuity in the chaos of experience. You think you're the one speaking internally, but more often, you're just the one listening. The thoughts appear without your permission, uninvited and automatic, yet they wrap around your identity like vines, choking out silence until only their noise remains. From the time you first learnt language, your mind began stitching together a narrator, a thread that could explain things, predict things, judge things. This narrator isn't evil. It's not trying to harm you. In fact, it believes it's protecting you. But what it protects isn't truth. It protects the story, the persona, the mask, the mental character you call me. But here's the thing. The narrator doesn't know who you are. It only knows who you were. It's built on old experiences, second-hand beliefs, emotional conditioning, and outdated defense mechanisms. It replays what worked once, even if it hurts now. It offers commentary, not because it's wise, but because it's afraid of silence. It mistakes repetition for reality. It thinks that if it keeps speaking, you won't notice the cracks in the illusion, and the illusion is thick. The voice tells you what you should fear, who you should be, how you should feel, and when you should hide. It tells you you're not enough. It tells you you're too much. It compares you to others and measures you against their highlight reels. It remembers your failures and recites them like sacred scripture. It doubts your worth. It doubts your future. It doubts your dreams. And it does all this in your own voice, so you believe it. But what if you didn't? What if you paused right now and just listened to the voice without obeying it? What if you heard it as you would hear the wind? No need to believe it, argue with it, or silence it. Just observe it. Let it speak without reacting. Can you feel that? That subtle shift? That's awareness. That's the real you. Not the thought, but the one who hears the thought. There is a space between the words, a presence that notices the words coming and going. That's who you are. You are the noticing, not the noise. And when you realize that, not intellectually but viscerally, something begins to dissolve. The grip of the inner narrator loosens. Its opinions lose their authority. You begin to question its assumptions, challenge its fears, see through its stories. You begin to realize that not everything your mind says deserves a reaction, a defense, or a belief. You begin to realize how much of your suffering wasn't caused by life, but by your commentary on life. The voice says, "You're failing." The awareness replies, "There is still breath." The voice says, "They don't like you." The awareness replies, "I felt their energy and it was okay." The voice says, "This is too hard." The awareness replies, "And yet, I'm still here." Because awareness doesn't speak in words, it speaks in presence, it speaks in stillness, it speaks in the language of being. That voice inside your head can't see the whole picture, it can't access the mystery. It wants certainty, control, explanation. But you, the deeper you, are not bound by those limits. You've felt this before. In those moments when the voice goes quiet, when you're in awe of a sunset, when you lose yourself in music, when you stare into someone's eyes and everything else fades. Those moments when the narrator takes a step back and something older, quieter, more sacred steps forward. That is you. The voice tries to own everything. I feel sad. I am angry. I need to fix this. But what if you stopped owning every passing thought and emotion? What if you saw them like clouds drifting across an endless sky? Temporary, shapeless, not you, just something happening inside the space of you. The truth is, the voice fears silence, because in silence it becomes irrelevant. It has no control there. It can't define you. That's why it rushes to fill every gap with commentary. Silence is threatening to the ego, because the ego only exists in language. Strip away the words, and the illusion of the fixed me begins to unravel. But you don't need to fight the voice. Fighting it gives it power. Just witness it. Let it speak. And notice that the witnessing is always deeper than the noise. The witnessing is timeless. The voice changes. The stories change. The moods shift. But the awareness remains. Steady, open, spacious. That's the ground of your being. That's where your freedom begins, not by silencing the voice, but by recognizing it for what it is. Just one part of the experience, not the author of reality. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to be the voice and start becoming the silence beneath it. It's not passive, it's not weak, it's powerful. Because in that space you're no longer reacting. You're responding. You're choosing. You're reclaiming the space between stimulus and response. And that space is everything. The voice will still speak, let it. But now you can hold it gently, like you would hold a frightened child. You don't need to believe it. You don't need to push it away. You can just say, I see you, I hear you, but I am not you, because you never were. And maybe the most important thing the voice will ever say is nothing at all. Because when it finally grows quiet, when it bows to the presence of something deeper, you'll feel it. The opening, the expansion, the return to yourself. Not the version that was narrated into being, but the one that's always been here, watching, listening, loving, silently, whole. You think you know yourself. You walk through life with a sense of who you are. Your strengths, your wounds, your memories, your preferences. You've rehearsed your identity so thoroughly that it feels like truth. But stop for a moment. Set down your name, your biography, your story. Look deeper. Ask yourself, have you ever actually met yourself? Or have you only met the story of who you think you are? What you call you is not a person. It's a performance, a well-rehearsed act held together by memory, by repetition, by meaning assigned to patterns long after they've passed. From the outside it looks stable, but on the inside it's always being rewritten, restructured by moods, by context, by the passing of time. And still you cling to it like it's permanent, like it's real. You weren't born with a self, you were born with breath, with sensation, with presence. The self came later, stitched together by others, handed to you in fragments. Your parents' reflections, your teachers' expectations, the judgments of friends, the impressions of strangers. Every word spoken about you became a thread in the fabric of your identity, and eventually you started sewing it yourself. You said, "I'm shy," because one day you were quiet and someone labeled you that way. You said, "I'm bad at math," because of a test you failed when you were 11. You said, "I'm not creative," because someone once laughed at your drawing. And piece by piece, belief by belief, the story built itself. And the most convincing part, you believed you were writing it. But the story is reactive, not reflective. It doesn't show you who you are, it mirrors how you've adapted. It records how you've coped, how you've been hurt, how you've tried to stay safe in a world that never explained the rules. You call it personality, you call it identity, but often it's just scar tissue disguised as selfhood, a series of emotional shortcuts to avoid pain. Think about it. Have you ever said, "That's just how I am," without questioning where that how came from? Was it a defense, a decision, or was it simply inherited, passed down like an unexamined heirloom, worn so long it began to feel like skin? You're not lying to yourself. You're just asleep inside a dream that was handed to you, a dream shaped by language and culture and repetition. You didn't invent the words you used to define yourself. You borrowed them, and you've used them for so long that you forgot they're not you. They're just labels, and labels are made to categorize, not to liberate. You've mistaken familiarity for truth, but just because a story is old doesn't mean it's sacred. Just because you've told it 1,000 times doesn't mean it's still alive. Some of your most cherished self-concepts are fossils, emotional artifacts encased in memory, no longer relevant to who you've become. And that's the part your story doesn't want you to see, that you've already changed, over and over again. You've mourned things you thought you'd never let go of. You've loved again after heartbreak. You've become softer in places where you once were sharp. You've outgrown relationships, environments, even entire versions of yourself, all without asking for permission. And yet, you keep telling the same story. Why? Because it's familiar. Because it gives you something to hold on to. Because even a painful story feels safer than no story at all. But what if you let the story drop for a moment, just long enough to notice what's underneath? What would you find there in that quiet space where the narrative pauses? You'd find a presence that doesn't need explaining, a being that's not defined by what happened to it. You'd feel the rawness of existence, not good, not bad, just real. You'd feel yourself breathing, watching, existing, without needing to be anything at all. And that's terrifying, isn't it? Because if you're not your story, then what are you? You're not your past. That's just memory rehearsed into identity. You're not your habits. Those are patterns repeated by a brain trying to predict safety. You're not your preferences. Those shift with time, with mood, with environment. You're not even your thoughts. They're just mental weather, moving through you but not you. So if you're none of those, then maybe you're not a thing at all. Maybe you're a process, a verb, a question mark unfolding. Not an answer to be defined, but a mystery to be lived. And maybe that's what you've been running from. Not your pain, not your trauma, but your vastness. The truth that you are so much more than any story could contain. That you are wild, fluid, ever evolving, that you are not something to be known, you are something to be experienced. But this world doesn't make space for that. It tells you to be consistent, to brand yourself, to pick a lane and stay in it, to have a pitch, a persona, a plan. And so you contract, you squeeze yourself into something recognizable, something digestible, something others can understand. But deep down you know, that isn't freedom, that's performance. The real you can't be posted, can't be marketed, can't be captured in a sentence or a role or a bio. The real you is the one who feels the mask getting heavier, the one who aches for something more honest, the one who longs for silence, not because it's peaceful but because it's real. You've never met yourself fully. Because the self you've met was introduced by others, was named by others, was described by others. But there's another you, deeper than name, deeper than memory, who watches it all unfold with quiet knowing. That part of you doesn't speak in words, it speaks in intuition, in chills up your spine, in the moment your breath catches and something sacred stirs, in those flashes of presence when the noise fades and you remember, even just for a second, that you are still here, before the next thought claims ownership of you again. You are not the story, you are the awareness reading it. At the moment you see this, really see it, the story begins to soften, the labels lose their weight, the past loses its grip, and something breathtaking happens. You start living as if you were new, not new as in reborn, new as in finally unedited, new as in not trapped by who you used to be, new as in spacious enough to contain all the contradictions you were told to hide. Because here's the secret, you're allowed to change the story. You're allowed to let old versions of yourself die. You're allowed to not finish the sentence that once defined you. You're allowed to tear out the page and start again, not because you're broken, but because you're evolving. So no, you've never truly met yourself, but now, maybe you're beginning to, and not as a character, but as consciousness itself, unfolding, undefined, free. There's something strange about the way you speak about yourself. You say, I am, followed by a title, a role, a description, as if that combination of syllables could ever hold the weight of your existence. I am a teacher. I am a parent. I am spiritual. I am broken. I am lost. You wear these phrases like uniforms, as if each one confirms something essential. But pause. Strip away the words, take off the title, the role, the identity you've spent years reinforcing. What remains? You're still here, aren't you? So maybe what remains is who you really are, and everything else is just costume. Identity is not who you are, it's who you play. A character stitched together from memories, language, culture, and fear. You learned early on that being seen required definition, that to be understood you had to be consistent, predictable, safe. So you chose a mask. Or maybe it was chosen for you, and over time the mask clung to your skin so tightly you mistook it for your face. You learned which parts of you were acceptable and which parts were dangerous, which dreams earned applause and which ones triggered discomfort, and so, piece by piece you built a version of yourself that fit inside the world's expectations. But every costume, no matter how convincing, begins to itch. And now you feel it, that quiet unrest, that ache in the soul that whispers, this isn't all of me. The performance has become exhausting. Smiling when you're unraveling, nodding when you're confused, claiming certainty when all you want to say is, I don't know who I am anymore. But that isn't failure. That's awakening. That's the soul tugging at the seams of the costume, asking if it's finally safe to be seen without it. Look at how many times you've reinvented yourself even if no one noticed. How many versions of you have died silently while the world kept calling you by the same name? The you who loved differently, the you who believed passionately, the you who trusted easily. All of them lived, all of them mattered, and none of them lasted. Because you are not a fixed being, you are a shifting consciousness, a living question, a self in constant rehearsal. But the mind hates change. The mind craves stability. It needs structure, a frame, a definition to orient itself. So it clings to identity like armor, even the painful ones. I am unworthy. I am anxious. I am unlovable. Why hold on to these? Because they're familiar. Because even suffering becomes a comfort when it's predictable. Because even limitation feels like safety when the alternative is stepping naked into the unknown. But your soul wasn't born to be a statue. It wasn't born to be labeled and filed. Your essence is wild, alive, unpredictable. It moves in spirals, not straight lines. It contradicts itself. It evolves without warning. And that scares the mind. Because if you're not who you say you are, then who are you? What happens when the label doesn't stick anymore? What happens is this: you become free. But first, the unraveling. The terrifying moment when the old costume starts to fall apart, and there's nothing underneath but rawness, vulnerability, space. You no longer know how to introduce yourself. You no longer believe in the script you once performed. And that's when the mind starts to panic. It says, you're losing yourself. But what you're really losing is the illusion. The illusion that you were ever a single thing. That you could be summed up in a sentence. That you had to be consistent. That who you were at 20 should dictate who you are at 40. But the truth is, identity was never your foundation. It was your cage. And the bars were built out of praise just as much as pain. Because even your talents became part of the performance. Even your gifts turned into obligation. You were told, you're so wise, so you played wise. You're the strong one, so you became stone. You're the funny one, so you hid your sadness behind punchlines. And now you're asking, who am I when I'm not performing? The answer isn't in the mind. The mind will only offer more costumes, more names, more labels. The answer is in the stillness, in the pause between roles, in the moments when no one is watching and you're not trying to be anything at all. That's where the real you emerges, not as a definition, but as a presence. You've felt it before. When you're crying alone in the dark and you're not thinking, just feeling. When you're in the middle of creating something and the world disappears. When you're with someone who sees you beyond your mask and you don't feel the need to explain yourself. That's the moment when the costume slips and something unnameable steps forward. The way we've been taught to fear that unnameable space, to rush in and fill it with something, a job title, a goal, a label, a belief system, anything to avoid the discomfort of formlessness, but that discomfort is sacred. Because what you find there, in the absence of performance, is presence, real presence. And it doesn't need a name. You are not your name, you are not your story, you are not your diagnosis or your role or your achievements or your trauma. You are the awareness that sees it all. You are the breath that continues even when the script stops. You are the silent witness that doesn't flinch when the character changes. And yes, the character will change. Again and again, you'll outgrow identities like clothes. You'll shed old versions of yourself not because they were false, but because they were temporary. And maybe that's the point. Not to find the one true identity, but to let yourself be many things, without getting trapped in any one of them. What if you stopped trying to be consistent? What if you let yourself evolve in public? What if you gave yourself permission to contradict who you were yesterday, not out of confusion, but out of growth? What if your identity wasn't a brand, but a garden? Something to tend, not something to protect. Because here's the truth. The most powerful version of you isn't the one who performs best. It's the one who can lay down the costume and say, even without the mask, I exist. Even when you don't know who you are. Even when the story makes no sense. Even when the mirror shows a stranger. Still, you are here. And that presence, that stillness behind the mask, that's not identity. That's consciousness. And consciousness doesn't need a costume. You trust your memories. You believe they hold the truth of your life, moments frozen in time, polished by emotion, stamped with the seal of lived experience. You say, "I remember it clearly," and you feel the authority of that claim settled into your voice. The memory seems real, solid, permanent. But what if it's not? What if your memories, the very things you lean on to define who you are not records of truth but stories rehearsed and edited by a mind desperate to create coherence? Every time you recall a memory, you don't just retrieve it. You rewrite it, subtly, unconsciously, like a book that edits itself every time you open it. The colors shift, the meanings deepen, the emotions intensify or soften, depending on who you've become since the last time you visited it. Your brain isn't a vault, it's a theater, and every memory is a scene being restaged, not replayed. Think about that for a moment. That birthday you always talk about, the heartbreak that shaped you, the betrayal that never left. They didn't stay frozen. They evolved, they adapted, not to preserve truth, but to match the story you tell yourself about your life. Your mind isn't interested in accuracy, it's interested in identity. So it bends the past to fit the shape of your current self. It smooths out contradictions, it amplifies emotions, it fills in the blanks with guesses so convincing you'd swear they were real. This isn't a flaw, it's how memory works, it's how the brain survives. But it also means that what you remember may not be what happened, and more than that, what you remember may not be helping you anymore. Some of the pain you carry isn't from the original wound, it's from the way you've remembered it, repeatedly. You've turned moments into mantras, you've etched old disappointments into your narrative so deeply that they've become your identity. They abandoned me, I failed, I was never enough. These phrases feel like truth, but what if they're just old interpretations, echoes of a self who didn't know yet how to see the full picture? You are not the same person you were when those moments happened. You didn't have the tools you have now, the insight, the strength, the clarity, and yet you judge those memories through today's lens and call it truth. You drag them with you like weights, thinking they're part of who you are. But they're not you. They're just stories, chapters, some accurate, some distorted, some wrapped around meanings that no longer serve the life you're trying to build. And still, you hold them. Because memory feels sacred, because you think forgetting means dishonoring, because you're afraid that if you let go you'll lose the lesson. But the lesson isn't in the pain, it's in what you become after the pain. It's in the alchemy, the integration, not the repetition. Your brain is always updating the narrative. Scientists have studied this, how each act of remembering reactivates the neural pathways and makes the memory malleable again, like wet clay. You recarve the story each time, often without realizing it. And so over the years the past becomes less about what happened and more about how you felt about what happened. You stop remembering events. You start remembering your version of them. And your version is colored by mood, by bias, by the stories others told you, by the emotions you were too young to process. You weren't just recording the facts, you were surviving them, filtering them through the lens of a nervous system still learning how to feel safe, and that lens distorted the image. You remember being alone, but maybe someone was there, and you just couldn't receive their love at the time. You remember failing, but maybe what you learned in that moment built the wisdom that guides you now. You remember being abandoned, but maybe that space taught you how to return to yourself. But your mind rarely tells that version. It prefers the sharp edges, the drama, the confirmation of your worst beliefs about yourself. And so it plays that version again and again, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Because it reinforces the identity you've clung to, the victim, the outcast, the one who always has to fight. But here's the quiet revolution. You can question the memory. You can hold it up to the light and ask, is this still true? Is this helping me? Not to deny what happened, but to reclaim your authorship. to take back your power from the automated storyteller inside your head. Your memories are not sacred scripts etched into stone. They are living, breathing myths, and you are their keeper. You can choose which ones to honor, which ones to reframe, and which ones to gently release. You can shift your relationship with the past from prisoner to witness. You can become the one who says, "That happened, yes, but it no longer defines me." And when you do that, something extraordinary occurs. You begin to experience the past differently. Not as a chain, but as a teacher. Not as a trap, but as compost. Broken pieces that nourish something new. You begin to see how even the most painful moments brought you here, to this breath, to this awareness, to this unfolding self who is no longer at the mercy of old pain dressed as truth. Your mind will resist. It will say, "But I remember it clearly." It will defend its version of the past like a religion, because the story has become part of who you think you are. But remember, clarity is not the same as accuracy, and conviction is not the same as truth. Just because the story feels vivid doesn't mean it hasn't been edited 100 times by fear, by grief, by repetition. So ask yourself, what would it feel like to soften the story? Not to erase it, but to loosen its grip, to let the version of you who lived it rest, to offer compassion to the self who survived it, to stop punishing your present for the things your past didn't understand. This is not about forgetting, it's about remembering differently, remembering with mercy, with context, with curiosity instead of judgment. It's about recognizing that every memory is a window, not a mirror. It shows you where you've been, but it doesn't define who you are now. Because who you are now is not a collection of old pages. You're the one holding the pen. And at any moment you can decide to write something new. That doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means honoring the fact that you've changed. And you're still changing. Even now, in this moment, as you read these words, your mind is shifting. Your cells are regenerating, your emotions are rising and passing. The you who began this chapter is already gone. And that's the point. You are not your memories. You are the awareness that holds them, and has the courage to let them go. You speak about yourself as if you are one thing. A singular, cohesive, unified I. You use the word effortlessly. I feel this. I want that. I am like this. But have you ever stopped to ask, who exactly is this I you're referring to? Is it the same one who laughed uncontrollably yesterday and felt hollow today? Is it the same self that once clung to a dream and now shrugs at the thought of it? Is it the one who longed for safety in the past but now craves wildness? You talk about yourself as if there's one you, but there never was. There isn't a single I behind your eyes. There's a symphony, an orchestra of selves, each one playing their own song, rising and falling as the moment demands. You are not one fixed character, you are a chorus of patterns, instincts, fragments, and roles. There's the version of you who shows up for work, focused, diplomatic, composed. There's the version who collapses in silence at night, overwhelmed by the weight of unsaid emotions. There's the one who jokes to mask discomfort, the one who flares with anger to defend something tender, the one who yearns for meaning, the one who numbs that yearning, the one who tries to stay awake, the one who longs to disappear. They all live inside you, they all speak with your voice. And none of them is the whole story. You've spent your life trying to make them all fit into a single container, trying to compress contradictions into coherence. But it never quite works, does it? Because the self is not a statue, it's a stage. And each moment calls forth a different actor, a different costume, a different part of your psyche that rises from the shadows and takes the lead. And that's not wrong. That's human. That's real. But the mind doesn't like that. It wants a single stable identity to hold on to, something predictable, something it can explain. It tells you, you need to be consistent, you need to know who you are, and so you choose. You pick the version of yourself that feels most acceptable, the most praised, the least complicated, and you promote that self to the front of the stage. You tell the world, This is me. You silence the others. You exile the messy ones, the sensitive ones, the contradictory ones, and you call that exile maturity. But those exiled selves don't disappear. They linger. They whisper. They emerge in your dreams, in your triggers, in the quiet moments when the mask slips. They are you too, and the more you suppress them, the more fractured you become, the more exhausted, because holding yourself together is not the same as being whole. What if you stopped trying to be one thing? What if you allowed the multiplicity within you to breathe? What if you saw your inner world not as a problem to solve, but as a masterpiece to listen to? Every voice, every mood, every instinct, a note in the symphony. Not all notes are sweet. Some are dissonant. Some don't make sense yet, but even dissonance has its place in music. And so does every part of you. You've been taught to fear inconsistency, to equate change with instability. But the truth is, you are supposed to change. You're supposed to evolve, to contradict, to expand. The self is not a brand, it's a process, an endless unfolding. And every version of you that has ever existed was valid, was needed, was born for a reason. That version of you who shut down emotionally, maybe they were protecting you from something too overwhelming to process at the time. The one who pushed people away, maybe they learned that connection came with pain. The one who performed perfection, maybe they were begging to be safe in a world that only claps for polished masks. Even the selves you want to disown were doing the best they could with what they knew. And now that you know more, feel more, see more, you can revisit them, not to banish them, but to reclaim them, to hold them gently and say, you mattered, you were doing what you had to do. And you don't have to carry it alone anymore. This is integration, not becoming someone new, but remembering that you were never one thing to begin with. You are layers, echoes, dimensions, and it's in the tension between those layers that the deepest beauty lives. You are allowed to be both gentle and fierce, both grounded and chaotic, both wise and confused. You can cry in the morning and laugh in the afternoon. You can forgive someone and still not want them in your life. You can be healing and still aching, growing and still grieving. You can be deeply spiritual and still get angry at traffic. There is no contradiction in being complex, only in pretending you're not. There is no central command center in your brain. Neuroscience confirms this. There is no throne where the real you sits, orchestrating each thought and action. What exists instead is a network, a decentralized field of activity, like instruments tuning themselves according to the stimulus of the moment. And somehow, through all this chaotic harmony, you experience the illusion of a singular me. But it is just that, an illusion. And that illusion, while helpful for navigating the world, can also become a trap, because you forget it's a mask. You start believing that there's only one way you're allowed to be, and anything that doesn't match that template feels like failure. But it's not failure. It's simply another instrument in your orchestra asking to be heard. You don't need to be one thing. You were never supposed to be. The idea of a singular self is a cultural fantasy, one that ignores the rich tapestry of your inner world. What's real is the witnessing presence that sees it all. The one who notices the anger rise, the joy swell, the grief crack open, the numbness set in. The one who watches each part come and go like waves in a larger ocean. You are not the waves, you are the ocean, and within you all of it belongs. The bold self, the broken self, the child self, the wise self, the one who doubts, the one who believes. You don't need to choose which one is right. You just need to listen to them all with compassion, to stop making enemies out of your own parts, to allow yourself the full range of expression without shame, without justification. Because healing doesn't come from perfection, it comes from inclusion, from welcoming back the parts you thought you had to disown to be lovable, from realizing that you are not a singular being to be understood, but a mystery to be experienced. So when the next mood arises, the next impulse, the next unexpected version of you steps forward, don't panic. Don't shame yourself for being inconsistent. Take a breath. Listen to the music. Ask what part of you is playing now. And remember, you are not broken for being many. You are beautiful for being whole. There's something deep inside you that wants to feel real, not just emotionally but existentially. You want to know you exist, that you are here, that you are someone, that this you is stable, solid, trackable. So you cling to the sense of self like a life raft in a storm. You point to your name, your memories, your personality, and you say, "This is me." You describe your habits, your wounds, your achievements, and believe you've uncovered your truth. But what if that very sense of me is just a hallucination? What if it's not who you are, but who you've learned to pretend to be? A phantom stitched together from thoughts, emotions, and sensations, all in the name of familiarity. You don't see yourself directly, not the way you see a tree or a cloud or a sound. You experience yourself as a sensation, a cluster of impressions rising in awareness, a voice in your head, a mood in your chest, a sensation in your gut. And because those things appear with your memories attached, you conclude, "This is me. This must be who I am." But when you stop and examine those parts, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, you notice something strange. They're always changing, always coming and going, so how can something that constantly shifts be the foundation of who you are? You might say, well, it's the continuity that matters. It's the fact that I remember being me yesterday and the day before. But memory is not truth. It's a stitched-together narrative. And even that continuity is an illusion, a mental shortcut the brain uses to keep your experience from falling apart. The self is a hallucination of stability in a sea of impermanence. And yet, you cling, not because it's real, but because it's familiar. Because even the pain that comes with identity feels safer than the mystery that exists without it. You'd rather believe you're someone, even if that someone is broken, small, anxious, or angry, than step into the blank space of not knowing. Because not knowing feels like death to the ego. It feels like a void, like the floor beneath you just vanished. But here's what you don't realize. That void isn't your end, it's your beginning. The self is a survival mechanism. Your brain evolved to create a center of gravity, an imaginary core, so it could organize information, make decisions, protect itself. This imaginary I gave the system a way to navigate a complex world, but it was never meant to be your truth. It was meant to be a tool. Somewhere along the line, you stopped using the tool and became the tool. You began to serve the story instead of living the reality. You aren't the first to live this way. You were taught to. The world around you insisted on self-definition. Who are you? They asked. What do you do? What do you believe? And you learned quickly that having answers made people more comfortable. It made you more comfortable. So you built a persona, not out of truth, but out of necessity. You became who you thought you needed to be to belong. And every time you acted in accordance with that identity, it became more real, not because it was real, but because it was rehearsed. And so the hallucination solidified. You stopped questioning the voice in your head. You stopped noticing the gaps between thought and reaction. You mistook momentum for meaning. And even when you felt the dissonance, that ache inside that whispered, "This doesn't feel like the real me," you pushed it down. You labeled it as confusion, you called it a phase. You medicated it with distraction. Because truth be told, you'd rather be someone than no one, even if being someone means wearing a mask that doesn't fit. But underneath all that performance, the real you waits, not the character, not the biography, the awareness. The unconditioned being, the part of you that isn't a thought, that isn't an image, that isn't clinging to anything because it was never separate to begin with. You don't find that part through adding more beliefs, more labels, more spiritual identities. You find it through subtraction, through peeling away every assumption you've made about what it means to be you. The self doesn't want to be exposed, it wants to stay in charge. That's why it panics when you go quiet. That's why it fills your silence with commentary, why it creates conflict just to maintain its presence, because if you ever truly stopped identifying with it, you'd see it for what it is, a mirage. A habitual loop of thoughts and preferences that mimics identity, but has no core. Just a pattern, just a familiar voice echoing through your mind, saying I, over and over until you forget to ask, who's listening? You aren't the voice, you're the silence it speaks into. And yes, that realization is disorienting. To realize that the you you've been defending, shaping, perfecting, isn't a real entity but a process, a mask made of memory and repetition. But that realization is also liberating, because if the self is a hallucination, then you can stop trying to fix it. You can stop believing every story it tells. You can stop contorting your life around its fragile demands. You can begin to notice the stillness underneath it all. The mind will fight back. It will say, but without the self, what's left? What about my dreams, my relationships, my goals? But those don't disappear. They simply shift. They become expressions of presence, not extensions of ego. They arise naturally from the flow of being, rather than from the need to validate an imaginary identity. You still love, you still create, you still act, but you do it without the constant need to maintain the illusion. You begin to see that you were never the one thinking. Thoughts appeared. Never the one feeling, sensations arose. Never the one reacting, patterns unfolded. You were always just watching. Just experiencing, just being. And when you see that, the fear begins to lift. The need to defend yourself softens. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to be anything at all. You simply are. Not as a concept, not as a character, but as the space in which all of life arises. You were never meant to be an idea. You were meant to be a presence. And presence doesn't cling. Presence doesn't collapse into narratives. Presence doesn't need to know who it is. It simply is. So what happens when you stop reinforcing the hallucination? When you stop rehearsing the identity? When you stop trying to be real in someone else's eyes and allow yourself to vanish into the truth of now? You begin to dissolve. Not into nothingness, but into everything. Because when the false self falls away, what remains isn't a void. What remains is the sky. Vast, still, infinite. You've been taught to believe that you live inside your body, that somewhere behind your eyes, tucked behind your forehead, there is a you. A thinker, a watcher, a doer, sitting in a control room pulling the levers of this flesh machine. That your hands are extensions of your will. Your voice is your signal, your thoughts are your command center. But have you ever stopped and truly looked? Not at the world outside, but at your own presence. Have you ever wondered, if I am inside this body, where exactly am I? Close your eyes. Go within. Try to find the boundary between you and this body you inhabit. Try to locate the watcher, the one who says, my hands, my breath, my pain. You'll search, but you won't find anything solid. No seat of self, no central operator, just awareness. Everywhere and nowhere at once. Because you're not in your body the way a pilot sits in a cockpit. You are not contained. You are the experiencer, not the container. You're not inside the body, you're experiencing it. You've confused location with perception. You feel your body. You see through your eyes, you move your limbs, but none of that proves there's a you inside the body. All it proves is that sensation arises, that perception is happening, that experience flows like a stream, moment to moment, but with no clear point of origin. What if the body isn't a house for you, but a lens? What if you're not trapped in this form, but simply flowing through it? Think about dreams. In a dream, your sense of body is vivid. You run, you taste, you touch, you feel pain, excitement, fear, as if it were real. But when you wake up, that body disappears. And yet you still existed. The dream body was never you. It was an avatar of consciousness. Temporary, fluid, reactive. Your waking body is no different. It feels more solid, more consistent, but it too is just an interface, a temporary costume your awareness wears to interact with a particular layer of reality. Science supports this in strange ways. Your experience of having a body is a neurological projection. The brain creates a map of the body in space, an internal simulation built from sensory inputs, memories, and prediction. This map is how you know where your foot is without looking at it, how you navigate rooms without bumping into walls. But even this internal body, this sense of me inside the skin, is just another illusion. There are patients who lose limbs and still feel them, others who feel sensations in places that no longer exist. The brain doesn't need a body to create the feeling of one, it just needs data. And your sense of self, the you who thinks it's inside the body, is part of that data stream. The truth is, you have never directly experienced the body, you've only ever experienced sensations, heat, pressure, movement, texture. These don't prove the existence of a solid me inside the flesh, they only prove that something is aware, and that awareness doesn't have a shape, it doesn't have a size. It doesn't live behind your eyes, it is the eyes, it is the seeing, it is the hearing, the touching, the being. You say my body the way you say my car or my thoughts, but the phrase itself reveals something deeper. You are not what you own. You are the one who notices. The body breathes, but you are aware of the breath. The heart beats, but you don't command it. The stomach digests, the cells regenerate, the skin heals, and you do none of it. These processes unfold without your input, without your permission, without your identity, because they don't belong to you. They are part of life, part of nature, and you, whatever you are simply witnessing it all from the inside out. There is freedom in this realization, a kind of lightness, because when you stop believing that you are trapped inside a form, you begin to experience the body with a new kind of reverence, not as your possession, but as your partner, as your expression, as the way life is currently choosing to know itself through you. Your body is not a prison. It is a portal, a gateway into presence. Every sensation is an invitation to return to this moment, not to analyze it, not to define it, but to feel it, fully, honestly, gently. The brush of wind against your skin, the weight of your feet against the earth, the rhythm of breath moving in and out. These aren't distractions, they are doorways, invitations to remember that you are not separate from anything, that you are not in here while the world is out there. There is no in or out, just one continuous field of experience. And you, as awareness, are that field. This is why some of your most transcendent moments have come when you forgot your body, or when you were so inside it that the illusion of separation vanished. Dancing until there was no dancer, only movement. Making love until the boundary between two bodies dissolved. Crying so deeply, you couldn't tell where the sadness ended and the release began. Those moments weren't mistakes. They were glimpses of truth. You are not a self in a body, you are consciousness experiencing a particular form. And yes, that form will age, it will ache, it will change in ways you cannot control, but you are not limited by its arc. You are not confined by its rise and fall. The body may grow tired, but awareness does not tire. The body may sleep, but awareness remains. Like the sky behind every weather pattern, it does not cling, it does not fear, it simply witnesses. You've mistaken the instrument for the musician, but the body is not you, it is the flute through which awareness sings, and even if the notes change, even if the melody ends, the silence that holds the music remains untouched. So take a breath, not as a body, not as a person, but as presence. Feel the sensation arise, not from a location, but from nowhere, and realize the one who feels this breath has no form, has no edge, has no name, it simply is. You're not inside your body, you're experiencing it. and the one doing the experiencing has never been confined. There is a quiet space in you that has never said a word. It's never formed a sentence, it's never had an opinion, never drawn a conclusion, never judged or praised. It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't need to. This space is always present, always untouched, always aware. And yet, most people live their entire lives without ever truly noticing it, because your attention has been hijacked not by life itself, but by the constant stream of thoughts that run across the surface of your mind, like headlines on a screen, insisting that they are you. You've been conditioned to believe that thought is the peak of consciousness, that to think is to be, that your thoughts define you, that without them you would somehow cease to exist. But that's not the truth. That's just the noise pretending to be the signal. Thought is not who you are. Thought is something you experience, and the one who experiences it does so in silence. You were aware before you knew language, before your first thought, before you had words for sky, for mother, for pain. When you were a child, you didn't think about being aware, you simply were. Present, open, alive in the raw texture of the moment. You didn't narrate life, you lived it. You touched without thinking about touching, you laughed without wondering if you were funny, you cried without explaining the reason. That was awareness, pure and unfiltered. Existence before the mind wrapped it in commentary. Thought came later. Slowly, like a fog creeping in. Useful at first, a tool, a way to name, to navigate, to survive. But over time it grew louder. It became the main voice, the center of gravity. And somewhere along the way you made a silent agreement. This voice must be me. And from that moment on you stopped noticing the awareness beneath it. You became entangled in the stories, the analysis, the endless rehearsal of the past and projection into the future. And all the while the silent awareness waited, unchanged, undisturbed, watching. It's still watching now. Even as you read these words, there is something in you that's aware of the reading, not the voice in your head that's commenting on it, but the space that sees the voice, the silent field in which the voice arises. That's awareness, and it exists without a single thought. You don't need a thought to hear the wind. You don't need a thought to feel your breath. You don't need a thought to sense that you are here. These things happen without mental narration. The moment you tune into them, the commentary may begin, "This is nice," or "Am I doing this right?" But the experience itself doesn't require thinking. In fact, thought often distances you from experience. It interrupts it, filters it, replaces it with concepts, and concepts are never the thing itself. When you eat, thought gives you labels: spicy, sweet, not as good as last time, but awareness simply tastes. When you walk through nature, thought might compare or judge: "This reminds me of that trip," or "I wish it weren't so hot," but awareness just sees. When you sit in silence, thought often rushes in to fill the quiet. "I should be doing something. What is this even for?" But awareness doesn't care. It's already whole, already at peace. You've spent your life trying to find clarity through thinking. But thinking isn't clarity. It's commentary, it's echoes, it's reaction. Clarity comes from stillness, from the direct knowing that arises when the mind finally softens, and the world can simply be what it is, without your labels, your filters, your conclusions. In that space, truth reveals itself, not as an idea but as a felt reality, not as something to debate but as something undeniable. And this is why awareness without thought is so unsettling at first, because it strips you of identity. It removes the scaffolding, the reference points, the inner dialogue you've relied on to define yourself. In the absence of thought, there is no story, no future, no past, only now, only being, and to the ego, that feels like annihilation, like falling into a void. But to your true self, your unconditioned awareness, it feels like coming home. You don't lose anything when thought falls away. You gain everything. You gain presence, stillness, depth. You begin to feel life not through the filter of interpretation, but through the texture of direct contact. You start to notice things you've overlooked for years. The subtle rhythm of your breath, the aliveness in your fingertips, the way light dances on a wall, the silence between sounds. These are not trivial details. These are the foundation of reality, the gateway to the sacred, and you'll only access them when you're quiet enough to listen. Thought will insist it's needed, that without it nothing would get done. And yes, thought has its place. It helps you plan, solve, communicate, but it is not your master, it is not your source of being. It is a function, not an identity. You don't need to destroy it, you don't need to silence it with force. You only need to recognize it for what it is, a movement, a ripple on the surface of a much deeper stillness. And that stillness, that vast, unshakable presence, is always available. It's what watches you when you sleep, what notices your dreams, what returns in the morning before the first thought arrives. It is there when you breathe, when you cry, when you laugh so hard you forget your own name. It is not something you create, it's something you remember, something you relax into. Meditation is not about having no thoughts. It's about recognizing that you are not the thoughts, that they can rise and fall without pulling you in, that you can sit, breathe, and simply be, without narrating the experience, that you can allow thoughts to pass like clouds across the sky, without mistaking any one of them for the sky itself. And when you begin to live from this place, not constantly, not perfectly, but even occasionally, your relationship to everything changes. You stop reacting so quickly. You stop needing to fix every uncomfortable emotion. You stop grasping at certainty. You start listening. You start softening. You start resting in a kind of peace that has no opposite, because it's not dependent on circumstances. It's just there, underneath it all, waiting. Awareness doesn't need you to be enlightened. It doesn't demand silence or control. It's not trying to make you holy. It's just being. Always, effortlessly. And the more you trust it, the more you return to it, the more you begin to see that you were never lost. You were just distracted. Awareness exists without thought. And in that truth, so do you. Most of your life, you've identified with the noise, the voice that comments, the mind that evaluates, the river of thought that never seems to stop flowing. You've believed that this thinking is what makes you you, that without the inner monologue, the constant analysis, the stream of memory and projection, there would be nothing left, just blankness, just absence. And so you cling to your thoughts like a raft in a storm, afraid that if you let them go you'll disappear. But you're wrong. You don't disappear, you arrive. Because you are not the thoughts, you are the space between them. You've been so focused on the content of the mind, the words, the images, the problems and plans, that you've missed what holds it all. The quiet, the stillness, the open, boundless awareness in which all thought arises, moves and dissolves. That space is not nothing. It is not empty in the way you've been taught to fear emptiness. It's not a void to run from. It's a truth to return to. It's the essence of who you are beneath the chatter. Not a personality, not a belief, not even an identity. Just presence, silent, spacious, awake. Right now, you're thinking. And even now, between the thoughts you're having, there is a pause. Subtle, brief, almost imperceptible. But it's there. The thought ends. There is silence. The next thought begins. That space between is not dead time. It is not the absence of you. It is you. It is what allows the thought to be noticed at all. Without that space, no thought could ever be seen, no sound could be heard, no emotion could be felt. Because it is that space that makes awareness possible, the screen on which all of life is projected. But you've been trained to overlook the screen. You've been taught to obsess over the images, to analyze every thought, to manage every emotion, to believe that the more you think, the more alive you are. But has that ever made you feel free? Or has it only made you more exhausted, more entangled, more disconnected from the simple miracle of being? You are not the voice in your head. You are the silence that hears it. And that silence, that gap between thoughts, is not an absence of self, but the presence of something deeper, something untouched, something ancient, something that was never born and will never die. Every spiritual teaching has pointed to it. The Tao that cannot be named, the kingdom within, the ground of being. And every one of those teachings is ultimately trying to bring you to the same realization, that you don't need to become anything. You just need to notice what's already here. And what's already here is space. Not the kind of space that separates things, but the kind that holds everything together. The kind that allows, the kind that includes, the kind that doesn't judge, doesn't rush, doesn't cling. That space is not outside you, it is you. You're not the thinker, you are the field in which thinking happens. You're not the emotion, you are the field in which feeling rises and falls. You're not the identity, you are the quiet backdrop that watches identities come and go like weather patterns. And this is why silence feels so strange to the ego, because in silence, the ego can't find itself. It needs thought to survive, it needs conflict, it needs attention, but in the space between thoughts, the ego disappears, and something vaster is revealed. Not a self, not a character, not a story, just being, just here, just this. And maybe for the first time you stop trying to define yourself. You stop trying to capture truth in a sentence. You stop grasping at certainty. And in that letting go you feel something ancient and wordless stir beneath the noise. You feel a peace that doesn't depend on conditions. A joy that doesn't need a reason. A love that doesn't require another. The space between thoughts is not empty. It is full of everything you've been searching for. And it's not hidden, it's just quiet. So quiet you can only hear it when you stop listening to the mind and start listening with your whole being. That space is there every time you exhale and don't rush to inhale. It's there when you pause before responding. When you rest your attention on a single breath. When you stare at the sky without naming what you see. When you walk without needing to arrive. It's there in the in-between moments, the transitions, the liminal zones of consciousness where one thing ends and another hasn't yet begun. Those moments are sacred, they are thresholds, and they are where your truest self lives, not the self that performs or remembers or reacts, the self that simply is. You may not have noticed it before because your attention has been trained to follow content, to grab onto every thought and ride it like a wave, but you can retrain it. You can begin right now to notice the space, to notice the pause, the breath, the stillness, to drop beneath the commentary and rest in the awareness that holds it. And at first it may feel unfamiliar, it may feel like nothing is happening, because your mind is used to drama, to stimulation, to chaos. It's addicted to movement. But slowly, gently, you begin to feel the richness of the silence, the warmth of the pause, the depth of the space between two thoughts. And you realize this is not the absence of life. This is life, unfiltered. You begin to trust the space, to rest in it, to return to it, not to escape life, but to experience it more fully, to be present in a way you never knew was possible. Present without effort, present without commentary, present without needing anything to be different. And in that presence, something begins to fall away. The tension, the urgency, the need to fix, to figure out, to prove. You begin to see that nothing was ever missing, that the answers you were chasing were never outside you. They were in the silence between the questions. Because that silence, that space, is your true nature. Not your personality, not your past, not your preferences, just space, just awareness, just being. You don't need to find it, you just need to stop running from it, Stop filling it. Stop fearing it. Let it open. Let it hold you. Let it show you that you were never the voice in your head. You were the space it spoke into. And in that space, you were always free. You've grown up believing that your thoughts originate within you, that every idea, every insight, every emotion, every whisper of inspiration bubbles up from some generator inside your head, that you are the source, that your brain creates your experience like an artist starting with a blank canvas. But what if that isn't true? What if the thoughts you think are not being created by you, but received by you? What if the mind isn't a factory, but an antenna? An instrument tuned into frequencies far greater than what you can comprehend. This may sound strange at first, because the world taught you to identify with the thinker. The thinker appears to be in control. The thinker seems to decide what comes next. But the deeper you look, the more you examine this process of thought, the more elusive its origin becomes. You never plan your next thought. You never sit down and say, "In 5 seconds, I'll think this exact sentence." It just arises from nowhere, from silence, from mystery. And when it comes, you claim it. You say, "I thought this." But did you? Or did the thought appear uninvited, like a wave crashing against the shore of your awareness? When you slow down and truly observe, you'll notice something profound. You don't create thoughts, you witness them. You don't manufacture insight, it arrives. Like a song on the radio, it plays through you, and you call it yours. But the station was already broadcasting, you just happened to be tuned in. This is not a metaphor. It's a deeper reality, one that many mystics, artists, and even scientists have brushed up against. Nikola Tesla once said, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration." You felt this yourself, in those moments of sudden knowing, in flashes of intuition, in dreams that deliver messages far wiser than your waking self. You didn't think those things into existence. You received them. The mind, then, is not a source, it's a field, a translator of vibration, an interface between dimensions. And when it's clear, when it's still, when it's not jammed by static, it picks up signals from beyond the veil of form, signals from the collective unconscious, from archetypes, from unseen realms, from the very source of being itself. This is why inspiration feels like it comes from elsewhere, why artists often say, "It came through me," why musicians describe composing as listening, not inventing, why writers speak of characters taking on lives of their own. They are not creating, they are attuning. Their minds become receptive, open, quiet enough to catch the signal and let it move through unfiltered. But most of the time your mind is noisy, it's cluttered, distracted, overstimulated. It's like a radio playing 5 stations at once, trying to shout over its own confusion, and in that static the signal gets lost. You become trapped in surface-level thinking, repetition, worry, mental habits shaped by culture, fear, and memory, and you mistake that noise for truth. But it's not truth. It's interference, it's the static that blocks the deeper broadcast from reaching you. To receive clearly, the instrument must be tuned. It must be quiet, and that quietness comes not from force, but from presence, from stillness, from spaciousness. When you sit without agenda, when you let go of the compulsion to solve, to prove, to grasp, your awareness begins to sharpen. Your mind stops broadcasting and starts listening. And in that listening, something miraculous happens. Truth begins to whisper, insights begin to shimmer, and you realize that wisdom isn't something you build, it's something you access. This changes everything, because if your mind is a receiver, then the quality of what you receive depends on your state, not your effort. You don't have to force clarity, you have to open to it. You don't have to invent peace, you have to allow it. The more present you are, the more coherent your field becomes, the more grounded your nervous system, the more refined the signal. And suddenly, what once felt mysterious becomes natural. Guidance arrives, not in dramatic ways but in quiet nudges, gut feelings, synchronicities, the right word at the right time, life starts speaking and you finally hear it. You begin to see that consciousness is not local. It doesn't live inside your skull. It moves through you, around you. It weaves through every being, every rock, every star. And your mind is simply one point of reception, like a window opening into the infinite. The cleaner the window, the clearer the light. This is why ancient traditions speak of purification, not as moral judgment, but as vibrational tuning. The quieter the ego, the less distorted the reception. The softer the mind, the more transparent the message. And this isn't about being passive, it's about becoming available. Becoming still enough, humble enough, silent enough to hear what's been whispering all along. You were never alone in your thoughts. You were never the sole author of your mind. You are immersed in a field of consciousness that holds more intelligence, more compassion, more knowing than your small self could ever contain, and it is trying constantly to reach you, not to control you, but to remind you, to reconnect you to the vastness of who and what you really are. This is why meditation matters, why silence matters, why spaciousness, presence, and simplicity matter. Not to escape the world, but to tune into it more deeply, to hear the subtle frequencies, to open yourself to the wisdom that can't be reached through logic, a wisdom that is already present, already here, already broadcasting, if only you'd pause long enough to receive it. And when you do, your life begins to feel different. Not because the outer world has changed, but because you are no longer mistaking the chatter for the message. You are no longer clinging to the illusion that you have to figure it all out. You begin to trust the deeper current, the quiet knowing, the felt sense of truth. You speak more clearly, act more authentically, love more freely, not because you've calculated the right moves, but because you're tuned into something real. You don't need to try so hard to be wise, to be creative, to be aligned. You just need to clear the channel, remove the interference, and the signal will come, because it's always been there. You just needed to listen. You've spent most of your life believing you are something contained, something housed inside skin, skull, and memory, that you are the thinker behind your thoughts, the feeler behind your feelings, the one directing all inner movement from within a definable center. But what if you've had it backwards? What if you are not a container that holds thoughts, but a boundless field in which all thoughts, sensations, and perceptions arise and dissolve? What if you're not an object in consciousness, but consciousness itself, not the cloud but the sky? It's subtle, this shift. It's not about believing something new. It's about noticing something that has always been there, beneath the assumptions, beneath the noise, beneath the reflexive habit of identifying with what you're experiencing instead of the fact that you're experiencing at all. Most people don't realize this because they've been taught to define themselves by content, what they think, what they feel, what they remember. They scan their experience and say, "This must be me," pointing to the thoughts floating through the mind or the tension in their chest. But you are not any one of those things. You are the space in which those things occur. If you sit quietly, you can begin to observe this directly. Close your eyes and notice what appears. A thought drifts in, maybe a memory, maybe a worry. You see it, then it passes. Another comes, maybe a sensation in the body, warmth, pressure, discomfort. You see that too. It's all happening, and yet you remain. You, the one who is aware, are untouched by any single thing that appears. And that's the clue. If something can come and go, it cannot be you, because you remain when it leaves. You are the witness, not the content. And this awareness isn't bound. It doesn't stop at the edge of your skin. That's another illusion, the belief that awareness is somehow located behind your eyes or in your head. But location is a property of objects, and awareness is not an object. It doesn't occupy space, it reveals space. It doesn't have a position, it allows position to be known. It's not in the body. The body is in awareness. That's why you can sense your toes without looking at them. Why you can feel your whole body at once. Because it's all happening inside the field of knowing. This field is open, it's boundaryless. Try to find the edge of your awareness. You can't. You can find the edge of a thought, a sensation, a visual perception, but the awareness itself, it has no walls, no limits. It's like the sky. It allows everything, but clings to nothing, and you are that sky. You've only mistaken yourself for the weather. Your identity is not your thoughts. Thoughts are like birds flying across the sky of your consciousness. They come, they sing, they vanish. Some beautiful, some strange, some painful, but none of them define the sky. The sky remains regardless of what passes through. Your awareness is the same. It doesn't depend on the quality of the content it holds. It doesn't diminish when a storm comes. It doesn't inflate when the sun shines. It is simply present, always. This is why, when you drop into deep presence, you begin to feel spacious, not because something expanded, but because you stopped shrinking yourself down to a single experience. You stopped confusing your identity with the thought of the moment, the emotion of the hour, the belief of the day. You stopped clinging to the clouds and remembered the sky. And in that remembrance, something loosens. The grip you've had on controlling your mind begins to soften. You no longer feel the need to police every thought, to curate every feeling, to fix every uncomfortable inner wave. You realize that all of it is allowed, that the field doesn't judge, that it holds grief and joy with equal openness, that it doesn't say, this thought is bad, or this emotion shouldn't be here. It simply witnesses, it simply holds, it simply is. You've been told that awakening is about becoming something more enlightened, more peaceful, more spiritual, but it's not. Awakening is about becoming less entangled, less identified, less attached to the fleeting stories of mind and ego. It's about remembering what's always been true, that you are not the passing phenomena, but the presence in which they pass. And here's the thing, this presence, this field of awareness, doesn't belong to you. It is you, but it's not yours. It's not personal. It's not separate. The same awareness that looks through your eyes is the same awareness that looks through mine. It's the same field that holds the stars, the ocean, the silence between galaxies. It doesn't begin or end at the border of a body. It isn't fragmented. It is the one, appearing as the many. When you realize this, the boundaries between self and other begin to dissolve. You stop seeing people as separate entities and start seeing them as waves in the same sea. Different in form, but not in essence. You recognize yourself in the eyes of a stranger, in the cry of a child, in the rustling of leaves. Everything becomes familiar, not because it fits your narrative, but because it shares your being. This doesn't mean you lose your individuality. You still function, you still have preferences, quirks, personality, but you no longer confuse the mask for the face. You play the role, but you know you're not limited to it. You move through life more lightly. You engage, but you don't cling. You feel, but you don't drown. You experience, but you don't contract. The more you rest in this field, the more you return to the quiet awareness behind the noise, the more your inner world transforms, not through effort, but through clarity. You don't need to heal every wound, change every thought, master every emotion. You just need to stop mistaking them for you. The healing happens naturally when you no longer identify with what hurts. The clarity comes when you stop getting lost in the story. Peace arises when you return to the space between. That space is always here. It's here now. Beneath the movement of your eyes, beneath the rhythm of your breath, beneath the impulse to agree or disagree with these words. It doesn't need to be summoned. It doesn't need to be earned. It just needs to be noticed. So notice it, not as something separate, but as your own essence. Notice that everything else in your experience, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, has changed over time. But the awareness that sees it all, that's never changed. Not once. It was there when you were a child. It's here now, and it will be here long after every belief you hold is dissolved. You are not a container. You are not a thought factory. You are not a thing at all. You are the space that allows all things to be. You think you see the world. You believe that your eyes are windows and through them pours an accurate, direct stream of reality. You trust what you perceive as truth, that what you see is what is. But this is the most persistent illusion of all. You don't see the world, you predict it, constantly, invisibly, automatically. You walk through a hallucination that you call reality, unaware that your brain is filling in the gaps, painting over the unknown, scripting the moment before it even arrives. And the strangest part? You believe it. Without question, without hesitation. You think you're witnessing the world, but you're actually experiencing a simulation built inside your mind, one that updates itself just fast enough to keep you convinced it's real. Your brain is not a passive camera, it's a storyteller, a pattern maker. It's not waiting to receive reality, it's trying to guess it before it happens. And it's doing this every second, every breath, using memories, learned concepts, beliefs, emotional history, and predictions. Your perception is not an unfiltered feed from the outside world. It's a construction, a best guess, a virtual model that your brain updates moment to moment. That's why you can read a sentence with a missing word and still understand it. That's why you can hear a song you've never heard and know where the melody is going. That's why you can glimpse a stranger's face for a fraction of a second and walk away believing you got a vibe. You're not absorbing reality, you're anticipating it. Your eyes don't create vision. They deliver signals. Light bounces off surfaces, travels through your pupils, hits your retina, and then raw data. But raw data means nothing until your brain interprets it. Your brain takes those signals and paints meaning over them like an artist working from muscle memory. It doesn't show you what's there, it shows you what it expects to be there. This is why two people can stand in the same room and experience two entirely different realities, not because the world changed, but because their predictions did. You think you see with your eyes, but what you actually see is what your mind tells your eyes to find. If your brain predicts danger, you'll see threats. If it predicts safety, you'll see comfort. If it predicts love, you'll see beauty in ordinary things. And if it predicts abandonment, you'll see signs of betrayal where none exist. This is why your inner world is your outer world. Not because you change objects by wishing, but because your perception filters every moment through the lens of expectation. This isn't philosophy, this is neuroscience. Vision, hearing, touch, they're all rooted in predictive coding. The brain is constantly running simulations. What should I see next? What should I feel next? What should I hear? Then, and only then, does it compare the incoming data to the model. If the prediction matches, it smooths over the input. If it doesn't, it adjusts, just enough to fit it into a coherent narrative. You think you're seeing the truth, but you're seeing what makes sense to you, what you're used to. You've been trained since birth to interpret reality this way. That's why the same stimulus can mean wildly different things to different people. A raised voice could mean danger to one person and passion to another. A hug could feel safe to one and suffocating to another. The event is neutral, but the prediction is personal, and this prediction creates your world. Even your sense of now is a prediction. You think you're experiencing the present moment, but by the time light hits your eyes, signals travel through your nervous system and your brain interprets the data. The moment is already past. So your brain compensates. It doesn't wait. It predicts the now. It guesses what's about to happen and shows you that. And when it gets it wrong, you notice a glitch, a hesitation, a misstep, a confusion, but most of the time the illusion is seamless. You live in a predicted now that's good enough to feel stable. This is why change feels uncomfortable, why awakening can be painful, because you're not just letting go of beliefs, you're destabilizing predictions. You're unlearning the model your brain has spent years refining. You're breaking the simulation open, and your system doesn't like that. It panics. It calls unfamiliar truth a threat, not because it is threatening, but because it's unpredictable. To the mind, unpredictability means danger. But there's another side to this. If your mind is always predicting reality, then you are not locked into what you see. You are co-creating it. Not with magical thinking, but with the feedback loop of attention and expectation. The more you expect to see love, the more your brain highlights it. The more you look for synchronicity, the more your system becomes aware of it. This isn't delusion, it's retuning. You don't change the world by force, you change how you see it. And how you see it changes how you feel, how you respond, how you show up. And in that showing up, the world bends to meet you differently. You are not the victim of your perception, you are its architect, but only if you wake up to it. Only if you stop blindly believing the simulation. Only if you begin to question, what am I really seeing? What assumptions are shaping this moment? What unconscious predictions are painting this interaction, this reaction, this feeling in my chest? And once you start asking, the cracks begin to appear. You see how quickly your mind jumps to conclusions, how it fills in blanks before reality has even spoken. You see how often you replay past experiences not to learn from them, but to keep them alive, to keep the prediction machine running. But you don't have to keep feeding it. You don't have to keep believing every pattern. You can pause, breathe, watch. And in that watching, space opens. For just a moment, the simulation slows. The predictive mind quiets, and you begin to see. Not the filtered image, not the habitual reaction, but the raw, luminous aliveness of the present. The sound of breath in your nose. The way light touches the floor, the rhythm of sensation in your chest. You see before the mind makes meaning. You see beneath the concept, and that is where truth lives. Not in thought, not in prediction, but in presence. So no, you don't see the world. You anticipate it. You render it. You predict it. But when you step beyond prediction, when you return to the raw space of now, reality reveals itself not as something to grasp, but as something to merge with, and in that merging, you no longer need to believe what you see, because you finally begin to see what's real. The moment you opened your eyes as a newborn, you began hallucinating, not in the way we typically imagine, no flashing colors or melting objects, but in the quiet, structural way that perception forms itself into something believable. Something continuous, something useful. You've spent your entire life inside this hallucination, calling it reality, not because it's the ultimate truth, but because it's been so stable, so persistent, and so collectively agreed upon that you never thought to question it. But now the veil begins to thin. Because here is the truth. Reality as you experience it is not a direct reflection of the world, it is a controlled hallucination, shaped by your brain, sculpted by your nervous system, and filtered through your expectations. Your brain is not presenting you with reality, it's offering you a story about what's likely to be there. Everything you see, hear, touch, taste, and feel is a simulation, an interpretation, a best-guessed rendering produced within your skull. Not because the world isn't real, but because your access to it is mediated entirely through your biology. You've never touched an object in your life. You've touched electrical signals interpreted as texture. You've never truly seen the color blue. You've only experienced a wavelength of light translated by your brain into something that feels like blue. You're not interacting with the world itself. You're interacting with your brain's internal representation of it. This might sound disturbing, but it's how the system is built. And it's not broken, it's efficient. It keeps you alive. Your brain doesn't want to give you the raw, unfiltered truth. It wants to give you something useful, something practical, something that allows you to navigate the world with speed and safety. The hallucination is controlled, tethered to sensory input, checked against patterns, updated by experience. But it's still a hallucination, still a fabricated model, a virtual reality headset you didn't know you were wearing. Think of it like this. The brain is locked inside a dark skull. It never sees the outside world. It never touches the air, never hears a sound, All it gets is electrical signals, patterns of energy, and from those patterns it constructs everything you know as reality. That tree, a prediction based on shape, color, movement, and previous memory. That voice, a projection based on tonal frequency and emotional associations. That sensation of you moving through space, an internal simulation based on coordinated signals from your inner ear, eyes, and body map. It's all happening inside, not out there, but inside, in you, around you, as you. Your perception is not a mirror, it's a map, and every map leaves things out. Every map distorts the landscape, and when you mistake the map for the territory, you lose touch with what's really there. You stop seeing, you start assuming, you start living inside a closed loop of meaning where everything is a reflection of what you already expect to see. This is why the term controlled hallucination is so powerful, because it reveals both the illusion and the structure, the chaos and the calibration. The hallucination is not wild, it's guided, it's refined by sensory feedback, but it's still invented, still shaped, still curated. And if the control slips, if the prediction machine breaks, if the sensory input falters, the hallucination can become unmoored. This is what happens in dreams, in certain mental illnesses, in psychedelic states. The brain continues to construct, but without the usual constraints, and reality, as you knew it, melts. But here's the deeper revelation. Even in your most grounded waking state, what you're experiencing is still a hallucination, just a well-regulated one. A hallucination that's been agreed upon by others, validated by repetition, and enforced by culture. You walk through a dream so stable, so believable, that you forgot it was ever a dream at all. And yet, you've had glimpses, moments when the cracks showed, when the edges of the simulation flickered, maybe during meditation, or grief, or deep awe, maybe in the stillness of nature, or in the intensity of a psychedelic experience, or in the mysterious feeling that time just stopped. In those moments, the control loosened, the hallucination faltered, and something else peeked through, something more real than real, not a new image, but the absence of one, not a clearer thought, but the space between thoughts. That was truth, not because it could be defined, but because it didn't need to be. This is what mystics across time have pointed to, the collapsing of the illusion, the stepping outside of the dream of mind. They didn't use the word hallucination, but they saw through the veil. They knew that what you see is not what is, but what you've been conditioned to believe is. And they also knew that freedom doesn't come from escaping the hallucination, but from waking up within it. You can't stop the brain from predicting, you can't switch off the simulation, but you can see it, you can become lucid in the dream, and in that lucidity a space opens, a space where you no longer take every perception as final, where you no longer react to every thought as truth, where you no longer need the hallucination to feel safe, because you've remembered what holds it all: awareness, presence, the silent watcher who was never caught in the simulation to begin with. This shift is not conceptual, it's experiential. It happens in pauses, in presence, when you stop trying to fix the hallucination and begin to witness it instead. You start noticing the subtle ways your mind fills in blanks, completes patterns, reinforces beliefs. You start feeling how much of your suffering comes not from life, but from the predicted story your brain keeps playing about life. And in that noticing, the grip loosens. You don't need to believe every fear, every judgment, every memory, because you see them for what they are: hallucinations shaped by history. And once you see that, you can create space. You can choose a different frequency, a different lens. You can soften the control, update the prediction, and reshape the hallucination, not as denial, but as liberation. You're not escaping the world. You're realizing that the world you've been living in was never as fixed, as final as you believed. And in that realization, everything becomes lighter, more fluid, more alive, Because when you know it's a hallucination, you can finally stop trying to control it. You can let go. You can rest. You can dance within it, knowing you're not its prisoner. You're its witness, its participant, its dreamer. So remember, you're not broken. You're hallucinating. And the hallucination is controllable, malleable, not from the outside, but from within, through presence, through awareness, through the choice to wake up again and again inside the dream. And when you do, you don't just see the world, you see through it. And behind every image, you find yourself, the one who was never hallucinated, the one who never changed, the one who watches the dream, but is never bound by it. What if I told you that you've never actually lived in a single pure moment of your life? Not truly, not fully. Because from the moment you learned to string words together, you were taught, conditioned, to live inside a story, a running narrative, a script that constantly rewrites the present using the ink of the past and the projections of the future. And here's the twist. That story is not reality. It's a fabrication stitched together by thought, memory, imagination, and fear. And yet, it's where you live, where you breathe, where you make your decisions, not in the now, but in the mind's story about now. You wake up and immediately recall what day it is, what your schedule looks like, what you're supposed to feel, because yesterday you were tired, or last week was rough. Your story picks up right where it left off. You're not just brushing your teeth, you're continuing the plot line. This is who I am, this is my job, these are my problems. But what if none of that is real in the way you think it is? What if the version of you that exists in your head is just a character, a composite, a role being played in a theater of stories? Because the truth is, the mind is not interested in the present moment, it's interested in maintaining coherence, continuity, a sense of identity, and to do that it creates a never-ending internal narrative to keep the illusion alive. Right now, as you hear these words, your mind may be doing it again. Is this true? Does this apply to me? What does this mean for my spiritual path? But that's not presence. That's not the raw reality of now. That's the mind narrating, editing, spinning the moment into something safe and familiar. You've been trained to live this way, taught to interpret the present rather than experience it. And because of that, you rarely meet life as it actually is. You meet it through the filter of what you've been told, what you've experienced, what you hope or fear it might become. Think about how many times you've walked into a room, seen someone you know, and instantly remembered past encounters, conflicts, compliments. You don't see them as they are, you see the story of them, and you react not to the moment, but to the mental construct you've built around that person. The story shapes the perception, and the perception shapes the experience. It happens so fast you rarely even notice, but it's there, controlling everything. And this isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Your brain is literally wired to make predictions based on past information. Science shows us that the mind doesn't just process the world, it predicts it, milliseconds ahead. You don't see with your eyes, you see with expectations, and then you backfill it with interpretation. I knew this would happen. Of course she acted that way. That's just how life is for me. These aren't truths. They're storylines, repetitions of old scripts. But here's the deeper truth. Every time you relive that story, you reinforce it. Every time you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I've always been this way, or people always leave me, you etch that belief deeper into your energetic body. The past becomes a prophecy. The moment becomes a rerun. And you, the infinite formless awareness behind it all, get trapped in a cage built from thoughts. But you don't have to stay there. You can step outside the story, not by force, not by denial, but by seeing it for what it is. Just a story, a pattern, a mental construct, not reality. The moment you realize you're narrating your life instead of living it, you create a gap, a space. And in that space, something miraculous happens. Presence appears. Pure, radiant presence. the kind that doesn't need a backstory, the kind that doesn't cling to an identity or project a future. It just is. That's where your power is. Not in perfecting the storyline, not in rewriting your past or controlling every scene, but in waking up from the script altogether. Because your life is not a plot. It's a happening. It's not a linear tale. It's a luminous unfolding. And the more you rest in presence, the more the story loses its grip. The more silence you allow between the thoughts, the more you begin to feel your existence, not just think about it. Have you ever watched a sunset, and for just a moment the mind went quiet? No commentary, no to-do list, no inner monologue about what you should be feeling, just the sky melting into color and the breath moving through you like a whisper from the divine. That was presence. That was reality, unfiltered. And it was glorious. But it was fleeting, because moments later the story returned. I wish I could feel this more often. I should post a picture of this. What does this mean for my spiritual growth? The mind hijacked the moment again, not because it's evil, but because it's addicted to the story, addicted to the idea of control. The irony is, the story you live in is often one of lack, of striving, of being almost there. Once I heal this wound, once I make more money, once I'm more enlightened. But the now doesn't need your improvement. It needs your presence, your full surrender, your quiet awareness, the kind of attention that listens, feels, and lets life reveal itself without needing to name it. But your mind will resist this. Because if there's no story to uphold, no identity to defend, then who are you? If there's no past to explain you and no future to fix you, then what's left? Just being. And that terrifies the ego. Because the ego needs time to exist. It needs a storyline to survive. Without it, it dissolves. And that's exactly what's required for awakening, ego death, the falling away of the narrative self. This doesn't mean you forget your past or become passive in your life. It means you stop being hypnotized by the voice in your head that tells you who you are. You begin to see thought as thought, not as truth. You begin to feel the aliveness of this moment, this breath, this sensation, without rushing to label it. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, is the beginning of liberation. Because the deeper you go into presence, the more you realize that life is not a thing happening to a person, life is you. You're not the character in the story, you're the awareness the story appears in. You're not the thinker of thoughts, you're the witness to the entire unfolding. And that witness is timeless, spaceless, unbound. Let that sink in. You are not here to be the perfect protagonist in a flawless narrative. You're here to awaken from the story altogether, to stop chasing moments that match the plot and start experiencing reality as it is, raw, undefined, unfolding. So how do you do this? You begin by watching the mind, gently, without judgment. You notice when the story arises, when the narration kicks in. She's always like this. Why does this keep happening to me? This moment is boring. And instead of following it, you pause, you breathe, you drop in, you feel the aliveness in your hands, your feet, your chest. You listen to the silence underneath the words, and in that silence something ancient awakens, a presence that doesn't need a past or a plan, a stillness that sees clearly, that remembers what you've always been beyond the story, infinite awareness, watching the dream of form dance before you. And from that place you begin to live differently. Not perfectly, but truly. You stop needing life to be a certain way. You stop trying to force reality to match the script. You let go of being the hero or the victim. You become presence itself. And in that shift, you find the peace you were searching for in the story. Because peace was never in the plot. It was in the presence behind it all. Waiting, watching, whispering. You've been here all along. Every morning you wake up and take for granted that what you're sensing is real. You open your eyes and call it sight. You hear a sound and assume it's hearing. You feel your sheets and your skin and say, "I'm touching something." But what if all of this, everything you think of as your direct sensory experience, is not reality, but simulation? Not simulation in the digital or artificial sense, but a perceptual hallucination, one that's generated within your brain, filtered through layers of meaning, memory, expectation, and conditioning, and then offered to you as truth. You're not sensing the world as it is. You're sensing a version of it sculpted by bias. Every color, every shape, every sound you've ever known has passed through a filter, and that filter isn't neutral. It's designed to show you not what is, but what you've been trained to perceive. You've believed your senses give you unmediated access to reality, like clean windows offering a view. But your senses are more like stained glass, colored, shaped, distorted, and you never see the glass itself, only the image it forms. Your eyes don't see light, they respond to electromagnetic waves. Your ears don't hear sound, they respond to pressure changes in the air. Your skin doesn't feel touch, it detects changes in pressure and vibration. And all of that, every bit of it, has no meaning until your brain interprets it, assembles it, compares it to a memory, and labels it. It's not that you aren't perceiving something, it's that you aren't perceiving it directly. You're experiencing a model, a reconstruction, inside your head. And that model is not universal, it's personal, it's cultural, it's shaped by everything that's ever happened to you. If you grew up in a house where raised voices meant danger, your ears won't just hear volume, they'll hear threat. If you were taught that silence means disapproval, you'll feel tension in every pause. If you were conditioned to equate touch with control, even the gentlest hand might feel invasive. You think you're sensing the present, but your body is often replaying the past. Your nervous system is not objective. It's protective. It shows you not the world, but a version of the world designed to keep you safe, according to what it thinks safety is. That's bias. And it's not just psychological, it's neurological. Your brain is constantly filtering, suppressing, highlighting, and distorting information to fit its current model of reality. It has to. There's too much data coming in every second for you to process it all. So it filters. And what it filters in, and what it leaves out, depends entirely on what you've learned to expect, to fear, to desire, or to avoid. That means that two people standing in the same room will never experience the same reality. Not because the room is different, but because the filter is. Think about that. Everything you sense, color, taste, heat, space, is already past tense by the time you perceive it. The light hit your retina milliseconds ago. The sound reached your ear slightly after the event occurred. Your brain fills in the gaps and predicts the now based on lagging input. Even your sense of touch is delayed. You don't feel something the moment it touches your skin. Your brain integrates the signal just fast enough to make the delay invisible. So what you experience as the present is actually a prediction, a simulation of what should be happening now, based on slightly outdated input. And into that simulation, your brain injects meaning. That's where the bias comes in, because meaning isn't inherent, it's assigned, and it's assigned based on a lifetime of mental associations. A smell might be calming to one person and triggering to another. A certain type of body language might feel warm in one culture and aggressive in another. None of these things are true in and of themselves. They only feel true because of the meaning you've wrapped around them. Even the colors you see aren't real. There's no such thing as color outside your perception. Color is the brain's way of interpreting different wavelengths of light. A flower doesn't know it's red. It reflects a specific frequency of light. Your eye catches that light. Your brain decodes it, and the word red is born. But that color lives only inside you. It's not out there. It's in here. In the simulation. So where does this leave you? If your senses are unreliable, if your perception is shaped by bias, if reality is filtered and rendered like a dream, how can you ever know what's real? The answer isn't to distrust your senses. It's to stop believing in their neutrality. It's to stop confusing sensation with truth. You can still taste, touch, see, hear, and feel, but now you do it consciously. You watch the filter in action. You recognize when a sound triggers a memory and when a memory colors the sound. You notice how the tone of someone's voice shifts your internal state, not because of what they said, but because of what it reminded you of. You begin to trace the lines between input and interpretation. You start to see the filter itself. And once you see it, you create space, you gain choice. You don't have to react to every perception as if it were the ultimate truth. You can pause, breathe, check in. You can ask, is this sensation fresh, or is it tinted by something old? You begin to peel back the layers. You stop being a prisoner of the simulation and start becoming its lucid observer. And something miraculous happens when you do this. Your senses begin to sharpen, not in the way of hyper-attleness or control, but in the way of clarity. You stop seeing what you expect to see and begin to see what's actually there. You notice subtle details, the way someone's eyes soften, the texture of sunlight through leaves, the quiet hum of life between sounds. Reality becomes more vivid, not because it changed, but because your bias stopped dulling it. This is why presence matters, because presence breaks the loop. It suspends the predictive model long enough for you to experience the raw data without the overlay. In presence, you touch life directly. You taste the world without the seasoning of memory. You see the moment before the mind tells you what it means. You're no longer living second-hand through the simulation. You are here. And in that here-ness, the senses become sacred again, not because they tell you the truth, but because they show you how you've been shaping the truth. They become mirrors, teachers. Each sensation becomes a doorway, not just into the world, but into your conditioning, into your past, into the inner architecture of perception. You begin to see how much of your reality was borrowed, installed, scripted, and you begin to unwrite it. Because when you realize your senses are simulations filtered through bias, you stop being hypnotized by reaction. You stop blindly trusting your emotional response to every sight and sound. You don't suppress it. You inquire into it. You slow down. You get curious. You ask, what is this really? And in that asking, awareness expands. You don't need to escape the simulation. You need to see it, feel it, study it, hold it lightly. Because in doing so, you stop being a character trapped in perception and start becoming the one who perceives, the seer behind the seeing, the listener behind the hearing, the presence behind the touch. And in that still, silent presence, reality finally becomes real. You've been taught to trust your eyes, to believe that what you see is what's there, that your vision presents you with an objective, unbiased picture of reality. But the truth is, it never has. Nothing you see is truly objective. Not the people in your life, not the places you visit, not even your own face in the mirror. What you see is not reality. It's your relationship to it. Your perception is not a camera lens capturing a neutral world. It's a canvas upon which your mind paints meaning, emotion, memory and expectation, and every brushstroke is colored by your inner world, by your history, your beliefs, your hopes, and your fears. So no, you've never seen the world as it is. You've only ever seen it as you are. Objectivity is a myth we cling to because it offers the illusion of certainty. It makes the world feel solid, knowable, dependable. If what you see is the same as what others see, then there must be a stable ground beneath your feet. But dig deeper, and that ground dissolves. Because perception is not passive, it's participatory. You're not just looking at the world, you're co-creating it as you observe it. Every glance, every interpretation, every snap judgment you make alters the landscape of your reality. And what you call truth is often just agreement, a shared hallucination, reinforced by language and culture. Look closely at how you form impressions. You meet someone for the first time and within seconds your brain has already constructed a character, not based on who they are, but based on your past. Their voice reminds you of someone who hurt you. Their body language triggers an old fear. Their eyes feel familiar, but you don't know why. You call it intuition, but often it's memory disguised as insight. You're not seeing them. You're seeing a projection, a version your nervous system has created to protect you, to guide you, to make sense of the unknown. That projection feels real, but it's not objective. It's yours. Even the simplest things, colors, shapes, expressions, are filtered through layers of bias. You look at a sky and see blue, forgetting that blue is not in the sky. It's a perceptual phenomenon, dependent on how your brain interprets light. You hear a word and assign it meaning, forgetting that the meaning is not in the sound, it's in you. You see someone smile, and you either feel warmth or suspicion, not because of them, but because of what a smile has meant to you in the past. You don't perceive objects, you perceive meaning, and that meaning is always personal. This doesn't mean the world isn't real. It means your access to it is always colored. You don't see things, you see stories. Your mind is constantly filling in the blanks, predicting outcomes, matching patterns. It takes partial data and constructs a complete image, then treats that image as fact. And when something doesn't match your model, when reality doesn't fit the story, you don't question the model, you distort the input. You adjust the world to match your expectations. This is how perception maintains its illusion of objectivity, by constantly editing itself to confirm what you already believe. This phenomenon isn't limited to individuals, it's cultural. Entire societies see the world through shared lenses. One culture sees silence as respect, another sees it as disapproval. One group sees a gesture as welcoming, another as offensive. There is no universal meaning, only agreement. And the more people who agree on a meaning, the more real it seems. But it's still interpretation, still bias, still a constructed layer over raw reality. You live inside this web of inherited filters, rarely realizing you're wearing them. Even time and space, the most fundamental aspects of your experience, are not purely objective. Time feels slower when you're bored, faster when you're joyful. Space feels smaller when you're afraid, larger when you're free. These aren't metaphors, they're perceptual facts. Your internal state reshapes how you relate to the external, and that relationship determines what you see, what you remember, and what you ignore. If your perception of time and space can shift based on emotion, what else is being bent, distorted, or masked? Emotion, in fact, is one of the strongest biases of all. You don't see what's there, you see what your emotional body highlights. If you're angry, the world narrows, you fixate, you look for reasons to confirm your anger, you don't see nuance, you don't see context, you see targets. If you're afraid, you see threats where there are none. If you're in love, even chaos feels poetic. This is not delusion, this is how the nervous system prioritizes survival. It doesn't care about objectivity, it cares about coherence. It wants the world to make emotional sense, even if that means distorting the fact. Memory plays its role too. You think of memory as a recording, but memory is reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you're not retrieving a file, you're rewriting it, recoloring it with your current state, current beliefs, current perspective. You don't remember the past as it was, you remember it as you are now. And those memories then shape how you see the present. The loop is endless. Past colors present, present reinforces past, and all of it feels objective because you forget how much editing is involved. But what happens when you begin to see this? When you start to witness the bias in action, you realize something powerful. If nothing you see is truly objective, then everything is a mirror. Every experience, every perception, every interaction is reflecting something within you. You stop assuming things are just the way they are, and start asking, why am I seeing it this way? What part of me is being mirrored back to me right now? And in that inquiry, you move from unconscious reactivity to conscious witnessing. You reclaim authorship of your reality. This doesn't mean you become passive or delusional. It means you become awake. Awake to the filters, awake to the lenses, awake to the stories that once felt invisible. And in that wakefulness you gain clarity, compassion, humility. You begin to see others not as fixed characters but as beings filtered through your perception. You hold your judgments more lightly. You question your reactions. You become less certain, but more present. Less rigid, but more real. You stop needing to be right, because you understand that rightness is just one lens, one angle, one slice of a much larger whole. And in that understanding you make space for other views, for deeper truths, for mystery. The world becomes less about confirmation and more about exploration, less about control and more about surrender. And most importantly, you begin to see yourself more clearly, not as the version your mind projects, but as the awareness behind the projection, the one who watches it all, the one who sees the seeing, the only thing not filtered, not because it has no lens, but because it is the lens, the pure, formless presence in which every perception appears and disappears. That's the paradox. While nothing you see is truly objective, there is something within you that is, not as a belief, not as a thought, but as the silent field in which all thoughts and beliefs arise. That awareness cannot be biased because it holds all bias. It cannot be distorted because it sees distortion. It is not part of the rendering, it is what allows the rendering to exist. So the next time you find yourself certain about a judgment, a memory, a reaction, pause, breathe, ask, what am I really seeing? What filter am I looking through? And then listen, not for an answer, but for a shift, a softening, a moment of stillness in which the image wobbles, and you glimpse the truth behind the picture. Nothing you see is truly objective, but the one who sees is. You've always thought of yourself as a singular being, a self-contained I, one person, one identity, one conscious experience moving through time. That's how the world taught you to see yourself, as an individual, as a body with a mind, a name, a story. But what if that's just a simplification, a metaphor your mind clings to so it can feel solid in an otherwise fluid sea of existence? What if the self you think you are, the unified me you present to the world, is an illusion, a curated performance held together by habit, memory, and instinct? What if the truth is that you are not a single entity at all, but a colony? You are a living ecosystem, a symphony of parts, a web of voices. Within your body, trillions of microorganisms are working in concert to sustain your life. There are more bacterial cells in your body than human ones. Your gut has its own neural network, often called the second brain. Your immune system is constantly negotiating with foreign invaders, making decisions that affect your emotions, your behavior, and even your sense of identity. Your skin hosts countless life forms that create a living, breathing barrier between you and the environment. You are not one. You are many. A bio-organic collaboration. A consciousness built atop countless layers of communication, both silent and sensory. And that's just the biology. Go deeper and you'll see your psyche is no more singular than your body. You are a mosaic of inner voices. An internal tribe of shifting personas, each with its own motives, fears, and memories. There's a part of you that craves comfort, and another that longs for adventure. One voice urges caution while another whispers rebellion. One seeks connection while another hides in shame. At any given moment, a different you is sitting in the driver's seat, and you rarely notice the handoff. You say, I changed my mind, but in truth, it wasn't the same I speaking. It was another aspect of the colony taking the lead. You are not a singular identity, you are a fluid collective. A constellation of selves that rotate in and out depending on mood, memory, environment, and need. And this is not dysfunction. This is nature. Healthy people have many selves. Healthy people have access to a wide emotional and behavioral range. Rigidity, the insistence on being one fixed person all the time, is what leads to suffering. Because life is not fixed, it's dynamic, and so are you. Even your name, the one you hold so dearly, is a label applied to a process, not a thing. You call yourself by a single word, But that word is wrapped around a moving river of biology, psychology, energy, and memory. There's nothing static about it. The you of today is not the you of 10 years ago, or even last week. Cells have died, neurons have rewired, beliefs have shifted, and yet you persist in imagining yourself as one unified being, because the alternative, that you are a loosely organized swarm, is unsettling. It's hard to navigate society that way. So you simplify. You compress your complexity into a manageable narrative. I am this, I am that. But these are stories, useful fictions, and like all fictions, they obscure as much as they reveal. Now consider your emotions. They too arise from different parts of the colony. Anger often speaks from an ancient protective voice, the part that learned early on how to defend. Sadness may come from a younger voice, one that remembers loss but still seeks comfort. Joy might arise from a part that feels safe, seen, and allowed to exist. None of these emotions define you. They pass through. They take turn. They move like weather. And just as you wouldn't mistake a single cloud for the sky, you don't need to mistake a passing emotional state for your identity. But here's the strange part. Despite this multiplicity, you still feel like one person. There's a sense of unity behind it all, a stable center, a thread running through the dance. So what is that? If you're a colony, then what watches the colony? What listens when all the voices speak? That is awareness. The one thing that is not a part of the colony but the space that holds it. The silent witness, the observer, the formless presence that notices all the forms and remains unchanged. That's what you truly are. Not the colony, not the chaos, but the calm, open space in which the chaos moves. This realization doesn't mean you have to reject your parts. It means you become curious about them. You start to listen. You stop asking, why am I like this? And begin asking, who within me is feeling this way right now? You begin to dialogue with your inner world. You notice when your inner child is scared, when your inner critic is speaking too loudly, when your protector steps forward to shield you from vulnerability. You see these parts not as flaws, but as members of your internal family, each with its own wisdom, its own history, its own reason for existing. And as you listen, something remarkable happens. The parts stop fighting. The colony begins to harmonize. Because what they've needed all along isn't to dominate or disappear, but to be seen, to be held in awareness. When you stop identifying with any one part and instead rest in the awareness that sees them all, the inner conflict begins to dissolve. You no longer feel split. You no longer have to choose between one identity or another. You can hold the full spectrum of your being, messy, beautiful, contradictory, in the embrace of presence. Even your thoughts reflect this multiplicity. Watch your mind closely, and you'll notice it doesn't speak with one voice. It speaks with many, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, sometimes wise, sometimes afraid. It argues with itself. It contradicts itself. It changes its mind. And yet, you call it my mind. But what is the mind in that sentence? Who is the one claiming ownership of all those conflicting voices? The answer again points to awareness. The one who watches the thoughts is not the thinker. It is the space in which thought arises. And that space is vast enough to contain every voice, without being any of them. Your growth, then, is not about becoming more yourself in the traditional sense. It's about expanding your container, making room for all your parts, all your contradictions, all the different aspects of your internal ecosystem, the warrior, the dreamer, the wounded child, the wise elder, the skeptic, the seeker. They're all part of you. None of them are the whole story, but all of them belong. And the more you welcome them, the more integrated you become. And this integration extends beyond the psychological. It's energetic, spiritual. The more you embrace your inner colony, the more attuned you become to the colonies around you. You begin to feel into others, not just as single people, but as layered beings. You hear the pain behind the anger, the longing behind the bravado. You stop judging others for their behavior because you see the parts within them playing out their own internal dramas. You recognize the mirror. And in that recognition, compassion arises, not as a concept, but as a natural response to complexity. Its way of seeing yourself as a colony is humbling, but it's also liberating, because you no longer have to be perfect. You no longer have to fix every part. You simply need to witness, to hold, to love the inner diversity without collapsing into any one voice. You can be sad and still whole, angry and still conscious, conflicted and still clear. You are not one fixed identity, you are a living orchestra, and your task is not to silence the instruments, but to let them play in harmony. So the next time you feel fragmented, overwhelmed, or confused about who you are, remember this. You were never meant to be one thing. You are a colony, a chorus, a cathedral of selves echoing through time. And in the stillness behind them all, who are the sacred space they sing in, you live your life as if your body is working for you, as if trillions of cells have pledged allegiance to the sovereign identity you call me. But that assumption has never been true. Your cells don't serve you. They don't even know you exist. They're not aware of your name, your dreams, your traumas, or your goals. Each cell is living its own microscopic existence, eating, dividing, repairing, dying, not for the sake of some larger self, but because that's what it evolved to do. Survival, not self-awareness, not loyalty, just existence in motion, driven by ancient biological instincts. You believe there's a unified you commanding this organism, but in truth, you are the story that arose after the biology, not the director of it. Right now, in this very moment, billions of microscopic events are taking place within your body. Synapses firing, proteins unfolding, mitochondria burning energy, and none of them are waiting for your permission. Your heart doesn't beat because you choose it. Your liver doesn't detox because you planned it. Your immune cells don't patrol because they admire your personality. These things happen autonomously, unconsciously, without consulting the self-image you cling to. You are not the captain of the ship, you are the echo, the narrative layer painted on top of an ancient, self-regulating machine that has been evolving long before there was a conscious mind to interpret it. The idea that your body belongs to you is a comforting illusion, but in truth, you belong to it, or more accurately, you arise within it, not as a controller, but as a byproduct of complexity. Your sense of self, the narrator in your head, the thinker, the planner, is the tiniest tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a vast ocean of autonomous biological activity, none of which is for you. Your skin cells don't know they're part of a face. Your neurons don't know they're part of a thought. They respond to signals, chemical gradients, temperature changes, and evolutionary programming. And yet, they create the illusion of cohesion, an organism that appears unified only because all its parts are trying not to die. That's the strange truth of your body. It isn't cooperating out of kindness. It's surviving, and it's doing so through constant negotiation. Cells compete. Cells betray. Cells mutate and rebel. Cancer, for example, isn't foreign. It's a cell that no longer plays by the communal rules. It multiplies because that's what cells do when unregulated. The only reason your body doesn't collapse into chaos is because most of the time these individual agents agree to work together, not because they believe in you, but because that cooperation increases their own chances of staying alive. And even cooperation is fragile. Your gut, for instance, is host to trillions of microbes, bacteria, fungi, viruses, most of which aren't even human. They outnumber your own cells. They digest your food, regulate your mood, influence your immune system, and yet they don't exist to make your life better. They exist to sustain themselves. You're not their master. You're their ecosystem. A warm, wet environment they've colonized because it benefits them. The fact that it also benefits you is a fortunate byproduct, not their purpose. You call it your body. but you are more outnumbered than in control. Even your brain, the seat of your so-called self, isn't working for you. Different regions compete for dominance, firing in opposition, suppressing each other's signals. The amygdala wants safety. The prefrontal cortex wants logic. The limbic system wants pleasure. They fight for control. They override each other, and you, the conscious mind, are usually the last to know. You feel the decision only after it's already been made. Then you justify it with a story. You think you chose to eat that snack, say those words, avoid that risk, but the decision was already in motion and the story simply caught up. It's humbling, isn't it, to realize that the body you cherish, the identity you defend, the story you believe is you, none of it is actually central. It's all emergent, constructed, secondary. You are not the master of your biology. You are its expression, its consequence. You are the song the orchestra is playing, not the conductor. And the moment you try to impose your will on this system, it resists. Try to force sleep, try to hold your breath, try to override pain. The body doesn't obey commands. It listens to balance, to rhythm, to conditions that have nothing to do with your ego. Yet despite all this, you walk through life as if you are the CEO of your existence. You talk about my health, my thoughts, my emotions, forgetting that all of these are happening through you, not by you. You are more of a witness than an author, more of a passenger than a driver. And this isn't a flaw, it's a revelation. Because the more you see that your cells aren't serving some grand unified you, the more you begin to release the illusion of control. You soften, you surrender, you realize that your body is not a tool but a miracle. A miracle, a living, breathing ecosystem that allows awareness to experience form. This shift is not about disempowerment, it's about liberation. When you stop trying to command your biology, you begin to listen to it. You notice its signals. You respond with kindness instead of frustration. You learn to dance with your rhythms instead of declaring war on them. You rest when tired. You eat when hungry. You breathe with intention. You honor the wisdom of a system that has survived for millions of years, not because it follows orders, but because it knows how to adapt. And as you deepen that relationship, you begin to feel the intelligence that runs beneath thought. The heartbeat that never needed your permission, the breath that enters without effort, the skin that heals without your intervention. These are not functions, they are sacred processes. Rituals of existence performed by countless unseen agents, all moving in harmony without ever knowing the story you tell about yourself. You begin to bow to them, to feel gratitude, not in some abstract way, but in a visceral, grounded reverence for the body as it is. Not as you wish it to be. You stop demanding perfection. You stop cursing your fatigue. You stop blaming your anxiety. You realize that every signal, every sensation, every fluctuation is a message, not from a subordinate, but from a fellow traveler, a voice in the colony saying, "This is what I need to survive." And when you listen, you build trust. You begin to heal, not by force, but by cooperation. Not by dominating your biology, but by aligning with it. The illusion that your cells serve you has created generations of disconnection. We treat the body like a slave, a machine, a problem to fix. We punish it for not performing. We override its needs with stimulants, shame, and denial. But healing doesn't happen through war. It happens through relationship, through remembrance, through the quiet realization that this body, this temple of trillions, has never been separate from the mystery that breathes life into all things. So the next time you feel betrayed by your body, the next time you ache or tire or break down, pause. Remember, the cells within you are not failing you. They are surviving the only way they know how. They are adapting to your inner environment, responding to stress, to emotion, to memory, to chemistry. They don't know your story, they only know what's needed to keep going, to replicate, to defend, to endure. And in their persistence, there is a wisdom far older than the self you believe yourself to be. You are not a singular identity directing a body. You are a vast, living colony, whispering life into form. You've been told that your DNA is the most personal part of you, the genetic signature that defines you, the molecular code that proves your individuality. It's what makes you, right? That double helix spiral, elegantly wound and stored in nearly every cell of your body, is said to be your blueprint, your inheritance, your biological fingerprint. But what if that's not the whole story? What if even your DNA, the core of your physical identity, isn't truly yours? What if it's more like a borrowed manuscript, filled with notes from ancestors, whispers from viruses, and signatures from foreign life forms you never consciously invited in? You carry within you the stories of thousands, millions of beings who came before you. Your DNA is a record of survival, yes, but it's also a battlefield, a conversation, a layered tapestry woven from forces you never saw and choices you never made. The genes that define the shape of your eyes, the color of your skin, the sound of your voice. Those aren't selections you made. They were passed down, imprinted by those who survived wars, famines, migrations, and heartbreaks. And those genes? They didn't just encode physical traits. They carried emotions, fears, predispositions, epigenetic scars that whisper through generations without making a sound. Even now, genes can be turned on or off by your environment, not just by radiation or toxins, but by your emotional experiences. Trauma can trigger genetic expression. Chronic stress can activate disease pathways. Joy, rest, and safety can deactivate them. That means your DNA is not a fixed script. It's an interactive, adaptive text, one that changes depending on how you live. So when you say something runs in the family, what you often mean is that no one in the family broke the pattern. No one created the inner conditions necessary to turn off what was always optional. But that's only part of the mystery, because much of your DNA doesn't come from your human lineage at all. Your genome is filled with fragments of ancient viruses, genetic hitchhikers that inserted themselves into your ancestors' cells long before you were born. Scientists call them endogenous retroviruses, and they make up over 8% of your genome. That means nearly a tenth of what you call your DNA is actually viral in origin. They are not invaders anymore. They've become permanent residents. Some even serve helpful roles in your development. Others remain dormant, silent, echoes of an ancient conversation between human and virus, written directly into your biological story. And it doesn't stop there. Your cells contain mitochondrial DNA, a completely separate genetic system, passed down exclusively through your maternal line. It doesn't combine with your father's DNA. It remains unchanged, like a secret message from your maternal ancestors passed hand to hand across the ages. That mitochondrial code plays a crucial role in your energy metabolism, your endurance, your resilience. But again, you didn't choose it, you inherited it. You are the current carrier of a message that was written long before you ever had a name. Even more strange is that your DNA responds to frequencies, to vibration, to sound, to intention. Experiments have shown that DNA strands contract or expand in response to particular electromagnetic patterns. Some even suggest that the language you speak, the emotions you carry, and the coherence of your thoughts can impact your genetic expression. That doesn't make you a magician, it makes you a participant, a collaborator with a living code that is far more dynamic, far more responsive than the textbooks once said. So when you think of yourself as a genetically determined being fixed by inheritance, you are only seeing part of the picture. The deeper truth is that your DNA is not a prison, it's a library, a vast, flexible archive of possibilities. Most of those possibilities remain dormant, unread, untouched, unless certain conditions awaken them, and the conditions that awaken them are not purely physical. They are also energetic, emotional, spiritual. Your DNA is listening not to your ego, but to your state. It's tuning itself to your inner environment, responding silently to the frequency of your consciousness. Now ask yourself, how much of what you think of as you is really just what your DNA has been allowed to express? How much of your personality, your preferences, your behaviors are the result of ancient code being turned on by a specific set of environmental triggers? When you react, when you crave, when you spiral into anxiety or anger, is that you? Or is that an echo from some ancestral pattern that never had the chance to heal? You are not the origin of your biology, you are its momentary vessel. And this doesn't diminish your uniqueness, it deepens it. Because now you know your uniqueness isn't something you created. It's something you receive, nurture, and pass forward. And here's the most humbling part. You are constantly altering the DNA of future generations. Right now, the way you live, the way you eat, the way you respond to stress, all of it is imprinting epigenetic data onto the next chapter of the genetic story. You are shaping the biology of descendants you will never meet. Your healing becomes their freedom. Your silence becomes their mystery. Your awakening becomes their foundation. You are not an isolated being. You are a node in a network stretching far behind and far ahead, carrying a living legacy encoded in the strands of your cells. When you understand that even your DNA is not fully yours, you begin to loosen your grip on identity. You stop defending your patterns. You stop saying, "This is just how I am." You begin to ask, where did this come from? Whose voice is this? What part of me is ancient, inherited, unconscious? And in asking, you begin to reclaim your power, not by erasing your DNA, but by dancing with it. You become conscious of the script. You edit what no longer serves. You activate what was dormant. You make the ancient personal. You become the alchemist of your own biology. This is why presence matters, because presence is what gives you access to choice. Not over what you were given, but over what you continue. You can't change the blueprint, but you can change the builder. You can't erase the code, but you can choose which parts are read, which are expressed, which are passed on. And that is more powerful than any illusion of control. That is co-creation with life itself. That is evolution, not as a random process, but as a conscious unfolding. So the next time you look at yourself in the mirror, remember, you are looking at a being written by thousands of others. Your smile, your scars, your sensitivities, all of them shaped by hands you've never seen. And yet, you are not a copy. You are a remix, a new iteration, a living experiment of divine intelligence expressed in flesh. And within you is the power to heal what was wounded, to rest what was restless, to choose what will echo forward through the spiral of time. Your DNA isn't yours. It's ours. It's theirs. It's life's. And you are the living proof that the story is still being written. You wake up each morning with the feeling that you are one person, that behind your thoughts, behind your movements, behind your decisions, there is a unified self, whole, intact, consistent. It's a feeling so familiar, so embedded into your experience that you don't even question it. You walk through life with the confidence of singularity, assuming that your body and mind are coordinated by some central authority, some stable I holding everything together. But if you stop and peer beneath the surface, not just into the mind, but into the machinery of your biology, you will find something startling. That sense of unity you feel, that smooth experience of being you, is not the product of harmony. It's the result of chaos being interpreted as cohesion. Beneath the stillness is a storm. Beneath the calm is a symphony of contradictions. Immune cells waging wars, neurons firing in competing directions, organs operating on conflicting cycles, microbes negotiating over resources. And yet somehow, you feel like one. Your body is not a perfectly organized machine. It is a biological riot contained within a loose structure. Your organs don't talk to each other in complete sentences. Your hormones don't always agree. Your neurotransmitters don't always sync. At any given moment, parts of you are inflamed while others are resting. Parts are growing while others are breaking down. You are not a smoothly running engine, you are a live battlefield of regeneration, decay, negotiation, and mutation. Cells die by the millions every second. New ones emerge. DNA is transcribed and mistranscribed. Mistakes are made, sometimes corrected, sometimes not. And yet, through all this activity, this swirling, unpredictable, microscopic chaos, you experience a seamless moment-to-moment reality. How? The answer is stunning in its simplicity and terrifying in its implication. Your experience of unity is a hallucination, a necessary functional illusion created by your brain so that you don't collapse into overwhelm. Because if you actually had to perceive the totality of processes occurring within you at any given moment, the biochemical pathways, the microbial dialogues, the cellular battles, your conscious mind would short-circuit. You were never built to perceive truth in its raw, unfiltered form. You were built to perceive coherence, meaning, continuity. You evolved not to see what's really happening, but to stitch together a narrative that feels smooth enough to act on. This illusion is not a flaw, it's a survival mechanism. The very same way your eyes fill in blind spots, your brain fills in gaps in your perception of self. It binds your experiences together even when they're disconnected. It smooths over inconsistencies. It creates a psychological glue that gives you a sense of being whole, even when you're anything but. This illusion allows you to move through the world with purpose, to make decisions, to form relationships, but just because it's useful doesn't mean it's true. If you've ever had a moment where you surprised yourself, said something you didn't mean, acted against your values, or felt like a stranger in your own skin, you've glimpsed the chaos beneath the illusion. You've seen how the you who speaks is not always the same you who feels, how one part of you wants to change while another clings to familiarity, how one voice whispers hope while another shouts fear. You try to reconcile it by saying, "I'm just conflicted." But what you're really witnessing is the multiplicity of your being, the many agents within you competing for expression, each driven by different evolutionary scripts, ancestral wounds, emotional patterns. This chaos is not only internal, it mirrors the chaos of the universe itself. Stars form from dust, ecosystems arise from entropy. Order emerges not by design, but through the interaction of millions of independent variables. The same is true within you. There is no central self pulling the strings, no single driver at the wheel, just a complex dance of systems, biological, neurological, emotional, constantly adjusting, recalibrating, reacting. And yet you interpret this orchestra of processes as a singular I. You say, "I feel, I think, I want," but there is no single I. Only a cluster of impulses temporarily aligned into a coherent shape. Your identity then is not a fixed thing. It's a process, a performance, a story told by a narrator that wasn't there when the events occurred. And that story is held together by the illusion of unity, a mental glue that stitches chaos into character. The brain does this because it must. Without a coherent sense of self, you would be lost in every moment, unable to plan, remember, or relate. But this coherent self is a mask, a position, a user interface, a simplified model of something far too complex to understand directly. Even language plays a role in maintaining this illusion. The structure of language demands subjects and objects. It forces you to say, "I did this," or "you did that," even when the action was the result of unconscious processes. There is no language for a multitude of semi-autonomous internal agents spontaneously produced this behavior. So you compress the chaos into "I chose," and in doing so you forget the storm from which that choice emerged. But if you look closely, if you sit still long enough, breathe deep enough, witness gently enough, you will start to see the edges of the illusion flicker. You'll feel the thoughts that arise without your consent, the emotions that contradict each other, the strange dissonance between your memories and your values. And in that witnessing, something radical begins to unfold. Compassion. Because once you see that you are not a singular unified being, once you feel the chaos behind the curtain, you begin to soften. You stop expecting perfection from yourself. You stop punishing yourself for being inconsistent. You realize that what you've been calling failure or weakness is often just the byproduct of systems within you trying to survive in different ways. This is where real healing begins, not by silencing the chaos, not by trying to enforce unity through force of will, but by allowing the illusion to relax. By letting the internal chaos express itself without judgment, by recognizing that peace does not come from eliminating disorder, it comes from embracing it. When you stop pretending to be one thing, you make space for the many things you truly are. You allow the mess, you honor the paradoxes, you stop striving for wholeness and start embodying it not as a finished state, but as a relationship with everything within you. Even your spiritual journey is shaped by this illusion. You seek unity, oneness, enlightenment, but often what you're really seeking is the feeling of coherence, a stable identity, a quiet mind. But true awakening doesn't come from perfecting the illusion, it comes from dissolving it, from seeing through the story of I and recognizing the vast, ever-changing process behind it. And from that recognition, a new kind of unity emerges. Not the false unity of control, but the true unity of inclusion. A unity that includes the chaos, the contradiction, the confusion. A unity that holds space for everything, even the parts of you that feel broken, scattered, or unworthy. Because in the end, the illusion of unity is not wrong. It's just partial. It's the shadow cast by something even more beautiful. The miracle that such complexity can give rise to consciousness at all. That a storm of cells, thoughts and emotions can produce love, insight and self-awareness. That through all the noise, something listens, something watches, something remains untouched. Not because it is in control, but because it is beyond control. That silent watcher, that spacious awareness is the only true unity you'll ever know. And it doesn't need to fix the chaos, it only needs to hold it. Because when you realize that the chaos is not a failure, but the very ground from which life emerges, you stop trying to become whole. And you start remembering you already are. You were taught to see time as a straight line, a river that carries you forward, past, present, future, all in perfect order. A story unfolding frame by frame with you as the traveler, always moving from what was to what will be. You believe you're riding time like a train, watching the world blur past, moving steadily through the hours, the years, the decades. But what if that's not what's really happening? What if you're not moving through time at all, but time is moving through you? What if time isn't a line you walk, but a lens that shifts, a current that flows not around you, but within you? Everything you perceive, every memory, every anticipation, every now, is shaped by this illusion of forward momentum. But look closer. The past doesn't exist anywhere but in your mind. You can't touch it, you can't return to it. It's a reconstruction, a memory altered by emotion, reshaped by narrative, rewritten every time it's recalled. The future? That too is a phantom, an image, a forecast, a movie in your mind. It hasn't arrived, it may never arrive. And yet both past and future exert their pull, shaping your choices, stirring your emotions, defining your identity. They live not in the world, but in your awareness. They move through you like dreams whispered into the stillness of now. The present moment, the only place life ever truly happens, is where time touches you. You don't move through time. Time arises within your field of awareness, unfolding moment by moment like waves in an ocean that you are not separate from. The ticking clock is not dragging you forward, it's your perception that is animating change. The sunrise, the breath, the aging face in the mirror. These are not evidence of time as an external force. They are evidence of change being witnessed. You're not a passenger on time's train. You are the station. You are the witness. You are the screen upon which time's story is projected. You feel time not as some objective measurement, but as emotion. Have you noticed? Time stretches when you're waiting, It vanishes when you're in flow. It crawls in boredom. It flies in joy. Time moves fastest when you forget to count it, and slowest when you obsess over it. That alone should tell you it's not something outside of you. It's something fluid, molded by your internal state. When you fall in love, a day feels like an hour. When you suffer, a second can feel like eternity. Time obeys perception, not mathematics. The clock is constant, but your experience of it never is. So where does that leave you? If time is not something you're inside of, but something that arises inside of you, then what are you? You are not the timeline. You are not the moment. You are the canvas, the field, the awareness in which the entire experience of time unfolds. Time doesn't pass you by, it passes through you. Like wind through a window, like sound through a room, you are not the event. You are the stillness in which events happen. You are the witness of time, not its victim. This changes everything. You no longer have to chase time, catch up with it, manage it like a resource that's slipping away. You can stop sprinting toward a future that never arrives or running from a past that no longer exists. You can stop measuring your worth by how productive you are in a given hour or how much time you've wasted. What if no time has ever been wasted? What if every moment you've judged as lost was simply a wave moving through your field of awareness, no more wrong than the next breath? You didn't waste time, you just forgot that time was never something you owned. The pressure you feel to do more, be more, race against the clock, is born from this illusion that time is a dwindling substance. But what if the deepest moments of your life, the ones where you felt most alive, most present, most whole, weren't moments when you had more time, but moments when you forgot time entirely, when you lost track of hours because you were immersed, flowing, fully present? That's not an escape from time. That's a return to what's real, the eternal now, the spaciousness beneath the ticking, the truth that awareness doesn't age, it simply observes change. You were never meant to conquer time, you were meant to witness it, to watch as it ripples through you like light through a prism, refracted by your attention, colored by your focus. You were meant to live as the sky lives, unmoved by the clouds that pass, not because time doesn't exist, but because its only reality is as a sequence of changes happening in the here and now. You don't move from moment to moment like stepping stones across a river. The river moves through you and you remain still, spacious and aware. Even your body reflects this truth. Aging is not a punishment from time. It's a choreography of biological change, orchestrated from within. Cells divide, tissues wear, the body shifts, adapts. But time itself does not cause this. Time is simply the name we give to change perceived. It's how we organize memory, how we make sense of impermanence. But the deeper truth is that change is happening now, and only now. There is no past self aging into a future self. There is only the self, watching its form evolve from within the same stillness that has always been watching. You can feel this if you slow down, if you sit in silence, close your eyes and breathe. Let the mind quiet, let the thoughts settle. Notice that beneath every sensation, every story, every breath, there is a presence that does not move, a watcher that does not age. That presence, your awareness, is timeless. Not because it is eternal in some grandiose sense, but because it exists only in the now. It is never in the past, never in the future. It's always here, always watching, and within it the waves of time rise and fall, like stories in a dream. When you live from this awareness, time no longer feels like a thief. It becomes a dance, a rhythm. You begin to feel when to act and when to rest, not based on clocks, but based on inner timing. You move with intuition, not urgency. You create from flow, not fear. You begin to trust that what needs to arise will arise, not when the calendar says so, but when your being says now. And in this trust, life begins to unfold not as a race, but as a revelation. You no longer ask, how much time do I have? You ask, what is time showing me now? This is what the mystics have always known, that linear time is a construct, that deep within you there is a place untouched by seconds, minutes, years, a still point around which all movement spins. The Buddhists call it the timeless self. The Taoists call it the uncarved block. In every tradition it's the same truth, that beyond the appearance of time there is awareness, and that awareness is who you are. So what happens when you start to live from that truth? When you stop trying to get somewhere and realize that you've never left the now? You begin to dissolve the tension that runs beneath your life, the urgency, the pressure, the fear of running out, because how can you run out of something that only ever exists as this moment? How can you chase a future when the future is only an idea moving through your consciousness? You begin to let go, to breathe, to be. And that doesn't mean you stop growing or dreaming or doing. It means your actions arise from presence, not panic. Your goals become expressions of inner truth, not compensations for imagined lack. You stop trying to outrun the past and outsmart the future. Instead, you allow the movement of time to pass through you, like music, like wind, like waves, and you respond, moment by moment, from a place that is always still, always whole. Because the truth is, you were never moving through time. Time has always been moving through you. And behind it all, you remain, unmoved, unshaken, timeless. You think the past is fixed, that it happened a certain way, and that way is preserved somewhere, like a photograph in your mind, a locked archive of reality. You believe that memory is your access point to truth, that what you remember is what happened, that the scenes playing out in your mind are factual reflections of moments you lived. But the deeper truth is far more unsettling and far more liberating. The past doesn't exist anywhere but in your mind. And every time you remember it, you change it, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The past is not a static record. It is a living reconstruction, a fluid story that reshapes itself every time you visit it. And in many ways it's not the past you remember. It's the last time you remembered it. Memory is not a file you pull from a cabinet. It's a recreation, a mental simulation. When you recall a moment from your childhood, your brain doesn't retrieve a perfect playback. It rebuilds the moment from fragments, sensory impressions, emotional traces, partial narratives, and fills in the blanks with assumption. It pulls from your current mood, your beliefs, your identity. It consults who you are now to decide how you remember who you were then, and in doing so, it subtly rewrites the scene, adds color, erases context, emphasizes what hurts or supports your current worldview, and when the memory ends, your brain saves that version, not the original, but the edited copy. So each time you remember, you're remembering a copy of a copy of a copy. And like any image repeatedly photocopied, the details fade and the distortions grow. That means your past isn't what happened, it's what you believe happened, and those beliefs are shaped by your current self. When you are angry, you remember with anger. When you are healed, you remember with softness. When you are bitter, you amplify betrayal. When you are open, you find moments of grace you had forgotten. The past shifts because you shift. Your inner landscape becomes the lens through which old experiences are interpreted. And so, the person you were, the things you endured, the relationships you recall, they're all in motion, fluid, plastic, rewritten not by time but by perception. This isn't to say that events didn't happen. They did. But the story you tell about them, that's what forms your memory. That's what shapes your identity. And that story is not neutral. It's not a documentary. It's a dream woven from meaning, emotion, and context. Your mind selects certain moments to remember not because they are true, but because they are useful. Useful for protecting you, or validating you, or organizing the chaos of life into something that feels coherent. But coherence isn't truth. It's comfort. It's continuity. It's the illusion of this is who I am because this is what happened, and yet what happened is always being rewritten by the I who remembers. This realization is both terrifying and freeing. Terrifying because it calls into question everything you've ever based your identity on. Your pain, your pride, your sense of justice, your memories of love and loss. If these are all subject to revision, what is left of you? But it's also freeing, because it means you are not the prisoner of your past. You are its creator. You are the storyteller, the editor, the dreamer. You can revisit the old scenes and choose what they mean. You can bring compassion to the places that once only held rage. You can soften the judgments. You can remember the humanity in those who hurt you. You can recover the parts of yourself that were buried under shame or silence. This doesn't mean denying what happened. It means acknowledging that what happened is always filtered, always interpreted, and that interpretation is yours to own. It means realizing that no one can define your past but you, not because you control the facts, but because you decide the frame. You decide whether a chapter becomes a scar or a sacred turning point, whether a mistake becomes proof of failure or the beginning of wisdom, whether a heartbreak becomes your lifelong wound or your greatest teacher. The event remains, but the meaning, that's where your power lives. And here's where it becomes even more profound. By changing how you remember the past, you change who you are now. Because your current identity is built on the architecture of memory. The story you carry about where you came from shapes what you believe you're capable of. If you remember your childhood as loveless, you may carry the belief that you're unworthy of love. If you remember a failure as defining, you may fear taking risks. But if you begin to see those same moments through new eyes, not to sugarcoat them but to understand them more fully, you begin to shift the architecture of self. You release the old narratives. You become more spacious, less reactive, more whole. This is why inner work is so powerful, not because it changes the past, but because it changes your relationship to it, and in doing so it changes the energy with which you meet the present. You begin to see that your suffering is not rooted in what happened, it's rooted in how you continue to hold it. The story you repeat, the identity you protect, the blame you refuse to release. But the moment you see that the past is not a stone, it's a script, you begin to write something new. You step out of the loop, you stop being the character, you become the author. There are memories inside you right now that feel sharp, heavy, unmovable, but they are not as solid as they seem. They are imprints, shadows on the cave wall of your mind. And as you grow, as you wake up, as you shift in awareness, you shine new light on them. You begin to notice what was always there but unseen. The resilience you showed, the help you received, the moments of beauty hidden in the noise. You realize that you have been the hero of your story all along, not because you always won, but because you endured. You survived, you kept going, and now you're remembering not just what hurt, but what held you. Your past is not gone. It lives in your nervous system, in your posture, in your habits and defenses. But it is not a fixed sentence. It is a wave that you can learn to surf. You can revisit your memories without collapsing into them. You can feel the emotion without letting it own you. You can witness what once consumed you. And each time you do, the memory changes. Not because it was false, but because you are no longer the same person who lived it. This is the hidden truth of healing. It's not about fixing the past, it's about updating the story, bringing new understanding to old pain, bringing presence to places where you once dissociated, bringing compassion to the parts of you that were left behind. When you do this, the past stops haunting you, it starts teaching you. It becomes integrated, it becomes wisdom, it becomes light. So when someone says, the past can't be changed, they're only half right. The events can't be undone, but the meaning can be rewritten. The energy can be transmuted. The scars can become sacred. You are not a static being. You are a river, a dreamer, a living, breathing reinterpretation of everything that's ever happened to you, and you hold the pen. You always have. The past changes every time you remember it, and you, the one who remembers, are changing too. Your mind is always searching for stability. It's looking for something to hold on to, a structure, a sequence, a framework to make sense of all that's changing. And in the midst of constant motion of sensory input and internal chaos, it turns to time. Time becomes the lens through which your mind organizes the world. Without that lens, everything would be too much. A flood of impressions, sensations, emotions without direction. But once time is applied, everything gains order. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is before and after. There is cause and effect. And so, time becomes not just a measurement, but a filter. Not just a system, but a story. A story your mind tells to feel stable inside the storm of being. You might believe time exists out there as an absolute, an invisible river carrying everything forward. But if you look closer, you'll see that time is experienced differently depending on context, emotion, and attention. It stretches in boredom, it evaporates in joy, it loops in trauma, and it disappears altogether in the presence of awe or flow. These aren't just mental tricks, they're clues. Clues that time isn't something the universe imposes on you, it's something your mind projects onto reality to survive its complexity. Without time, how would you know who you are? Without time, where would you place your memories, your goals, your grief? The mind uses time to stack meaning into a manageable form. It uses it like scaffolding to build the illusion of continuity, to say, I was here yesterday, I will be here tomorrow. I must be real. But what if that's the very illusion that keeps you from experiencing the full depth of what's here now? What if the mind's use of time, though helpful, is also a veil, softening the edges of mystery, turning the infinite into the linear, collapsing the eternal now into a digestible timeline? You think you are remembering the past, anticipating the future, living in the present, but what you're really doing is filtering the raw, chaotic, non-linear field of experience through the lens of time, just to make it feel safe. Predictable. Familiar. You're not experiencing time, you're interpreting reality through it. Every structure you rely on, your calendar, your memories, your to-do lists, your plans, is a way of grounding into this temporal lens. And it works. It lets you build a life. But it also boxes you in, because once you believe the lens is the truth, you forget that time is something you're using, not something you're in. And that's when you start to suffer. That's when you panic about getting older. That's when you chase deadlines and compare your life to timelines. That's when you regret the past and fear the future. That's when you start thinking there's something wrong with being exactly where you are. But you are not running out of time. You are not late. You are not early. You are simply looking through a lens that makes it appear that way. Your existence isn't on a clock. Your growth isn't linear. You are not a machine being measured by output per hour. You are a field of consciousness, pulsing with infinite becoming. And time is how the mind makes sense of the process. When you let go of needing things to happen on time, when you stop tying your worth to milestones or deadlines, you begin to see a deeper rhythm, a soul rhythm, a natural unfolding that has nothing to do with clocks or calendars, and everything to do with readiness, receptivity, alignment. That's the great paradox. Time provides the illusion of stability, but real stability comes from something timeless. It comes from presence, from the part of you that watches all of it, the minutes, the memories, the plans, without being changed by them. That part of you doesn't need time to feel whole. It doesn't need a future to hope for or a past to explain. It is now. It has always been now. And when you rest in that part, when you let the story of time dissolve even for a moment, you find a stillness that no amount of planning or progress can offer. That stillness doesn't erase your timeline. It simply reminds you that you are more than the timeline. It lets you engage with time as a tool, not as a truth. You can still set goals. You can still honor your memories, but you're no longer enslaved by the illusion that your life must unfold according to some external schedule. You realize that late and early are judgments, that the mind uses those judgments to create a sense of control, and you also realize that the deepest things, love, awakening, peace, don't follow a schedule. They don't arrive when you expect. They arrive when the inner space is ready. When you're identified with the lens of time, you live in scarcity. There's never enough time. There's too much past. There's not enough future. You rush. You regret. You resist. But when you realize that time is just a lens, you stop arguing with the flow of life. You stop trying to outrun the present moment. You begin to live inside it. And that's where all the real power lives. Because the only place you can ever make a choice, feel joy, release pain, or wake up, is right now. Not in the future, not in the memory, now. You don't need to destroy the idea of time. You just need to stop worshipping it. Stop measuring your life by how quickly you achieve. Stop judging your path by how it compares to others. Start listening to the deeper rhythm inside you, the one that knows when to move and when to wait, the one that doesn't care how old you are or what year it is. That rhythm is the truth beneath the lens. That's your real compass. And here's the beauty. Once you stop relying on time to give you stability, you discover a kind of freedom you didn't know was possible. You stop being obsessed with the next thing. You stop clinging to the last thing. You begin to trust your life as it is, messy, sacred, unscheduled. You begin to feel the presence of something eternal inside the temporary. You realize that the only thing more stable than time is awareness. And you are that awareness, not the moments, not the lens, not the movement, but the spaciousness that allows it all to arise. Time is a lens the mind uses to feel stable. But you are not the mind. You are the silence it floats in. And that silence has never moved. You have always experienced your life as a movement through time. You wake up each morning with the sense that today follows yesterday, and tomorrow waits ahead like a train you haven't boarded yet. Your days unfold like dominoes, one pushing the next, and your mind depends on that rhythm to make sense of what's happening. You trust in time the way a child trusts the ground, not because you can prove it, but because without it everything would dissolve into chaos. But here's the truth that begins to unravel things. Time is not a fundamental reality. Time is a lens your mind applies to the overwhelming flood of experience to feel stable. It's not something you're inside of, it's something you're looking through, a filter that creates the illusion of order in a universe that is far less linear than it appears. Your mind doesn't like disorder. It doesn't know what to do with pure presence, so it creates a timeline. It segments experience into before and after. It marks moments with beginnings and ends. It uses memory as proof that the past is real, and anticipation as evidence of a future that hasn't happened yet. But in truth, neither exists anywhere but in the imagination. The past is not stored in some cosmic archive. It only lives as neural patterns in your brain, reconstructed, not replayed. And the future is just a series of mental projections based on current thoughts, fears, and hopes, yet you treat both as real locations. You plan for them, you grieve them, you obsess over them, and the entire time you miss the present, the only place where life ever actually happens. Time, as you know it, is a survival strategy. Imagine if you experienced reality in its raw, unfiltered totality, all sensations, thoughts, images, and emotions, crashing into awareness without separation. It would be overwhelming. Your nervous system would collapse, so your mind simplifies the input. It slices experience into a sequence. It gives everything a timestamp. It says this happened first, then that, and next this will come. It builds a thread you can follow, so that you don't drown in the infinity of now. This is not wrong, it's necessary. It's what allows you to function. But functioning is not the same as seeing clearly. And once you see that time is a lens, not a law, you can begin to loosen your grip on the story it tells. The illusion of time is reinforced by everything around you. Clocks tick, calendars hang, appointments fill digital screens. You measure your life in years, goals, deadlines. You mark your age, your achievements, your failures, all in relation to time. You call yourself early, late, ahead, behind. But behind what? Ahead of whom? The truth is, these are artificial comparisons based on a model that was designed to manage societies, not soul. And yet you take it personally. You judge your worth by how efficiently you use your hours. You evaluate your success based on how quickly you reach your imagined milestones. You forget that all of this is built on a lens, and the lens is not reality. You've been taught that time is scarce, that it's running out, that you have to hurry or you'll miss something vital. This belief creates a subtle panic that lives beneath your everyday choices. It whispers, go faster, do more, don't waste it. And that panic isn't coming from your heart. It's coming from the mind trying to stabilize itself with a rigid framework. But time isn't running out. Time isn't a faucet you can control or a treadmill you're stuck on. Time is an experience, not a substance. You don't use it, you interpret it. And you can change how you experience it by changing the lens you're looking through. Have you noticed how time bends in different emotional states? When you're in pain, a single minute can feel like an hour. When you're in flow, hours disappear in what feels like seconds. This isn't just perception, it's proof. It shows that time is not fixed. It expands and contracts based on your level of presence, your emotional frequency, your mental absorption. This is why meditation feels timeless. This is why trauma loops and repeats. This is why love can make a single afternoon feel eternal. Time is elastic because it's not outside of you, it's inside you. It's an internal clock painted onto reality by a mind trying to make sense of something much bigger than it can hold. You can feel this when you slow down, when you stop tracking minutes and start breathing fully, when you stop measuring and start witnessing. In that stillness, time starts to dissolve. Not because the world stops turning, but because you stop needing the illusion of movement to feel grounded. You begin to taste something beyond duration, a kind of presence that is both ancient and immediate. In that space you realize that time was never the point, the moment was. And the moment doesn't live on a line, it lives everywhere all at once. When you rest in that awareness, you no longer need the mind's lens to feel safe. You become the safety. You become the ground beneath the story of time. And this changes everything. You stop living according to the calendar of expectations. You stop rushing. You stop regretting. You stop waiting. You start noticing. You start arriving. You start responding to life from a place that's not tied to some external clock, but from your own internal rhythm. The rhythm that's always been there beneath the tick of the second hand. You begin to trust the unfolding of your life, not because it's on schedule, but because it's yours. You stop trying to catch up to anything, because you realize there's nowhere to go but deeper into now. This doesn't mean you abandon time completely. It means you see it clearly. You stop confusing the lens with the truth. You stop using time as a weapon against yourself. You stop saying, I should be further along, because you realize there is no map. There is only presence, only becoming, only the unfolding of a path that can't be measured, only lived. You start allowing your process to move at the speed of soul, not the speed of culture. You let go of timelines that were never yours to begin with. You stop looking at the lives of others and comparing their chapters to your own. You stop fearing that you've missed something, and you begin trusting that nothing meant for you will require you to rush. Time is a lens the mind uses to feel stable, but stability was never supposed to come from control. It was supposed to come from connection. Connection to breath, to body, to awareness, to the mystery that lives in the quiet spaces between thought. That mystery isn't measured in hours. It's not contained by clocks. It lives in the silence between seconds. It lives in the moment you pause long enough to feel the aliveness beneath the story. That's the real truth beneath time. That's the place you've always been. So the next time you find yourself rushing, comparing, regretting, or trying to push the river of your life to flow faster, remember this: you're not behind, you're not late, you're not running out of time. You're simply looking through a lens that tells you so. And the moment you put down the lens, even for a breath, you'll remember, time is not your master. Presence is your home. And presence never moves. It simply waits for you to arrive. Long before you could speak, before you had a name, before you even knew what a self was, you were being programmed. Not maliciously, not deliberately by some scheming hand, but naturally, invisibly and constantly, by the very world you were born into. From your first breath, everything around you began to shape what you would one day call you. The voices you heard, the faces you saw, the warmth or coldness of the hands that held you. These weren't just experiences, they were instructions. Instructions for how to feel, how to trust, how to shrink, how to seek approval. Your nervous system was wide open, absorbing everything without filters, without question, and the messages were many. You are loved if you're quiet. You are safe if you obey. You are good if you please. You are worthy if you win. These didn't arrive as words. They arrived as tone, reaction, vibration, and they entered you like code. This is how identity is formed, not as a decision, but as a survival adaptation. You didn't sit down and decide who you were. You inherited templates. You learned how to be by observing what was rewarded, what was punished, what was ignored. Before you could say, I, you were already performing a version of it. The smile that made them praise you, the silence that made them stop yelling, the obedience that made you feel wanted. These weren't your conscious choices. They were the masks you wore to stay connected. Because connection at that stage meant life. You were not looking to discover yourself. You were learning how to disappear in a way that kept you close to love. And so the programming deepened. You learned not just what to do, but what not to be. Don't cry too loud. Don't be too curious. Don't be too slow. Don't need too much. You internalized these limits not as instructions, but as truths. You didn't think, they are uncomfortable with my emotions. You thought, my emotions are wrong. You didn't think, they're not capable of meeting my needs. You thought, my needs are too much. And from that internalized distortion, you built your personality. Polite, compliant, smart, helpful. Whatever got you love, whatever got you space. You built a mask and then forgot it was a mask, because to survive you had to. By the time you had words, the programming had already taken root. The way you talked about yourself, your strengths, your insecurities, your fears, were simply the outward expression of what had been silently shaped within. Your thoughts were echoes of voices you didn't recognize anymore. Your beliefs were inherited assumptions passed down like furniture, unquestioned, familiar, heavy. You believed things about the world, not because you tested them, but because they were modeled for you over and over again. And you carried those beliefs into adulthood like invisible armor. You thought they were facts, but they were just instructions you forgot you received. This is the invisible tragedy of human life. Most people die having never met who they really are. They live as the product of a program installed before they knew how to resist it. They chase goals that are echoes of their parents' unmet dreams. They avoid risks because they were taught that safety equals silence. They choose partners based on patterns learned from caregivers who themselves were wounded. They call it love. They call it logic. But beneath it all is programming. Subtle, early, powerful. Programming that shaped not just what they think, but what they can imagine thinking. The boundaries of belief, the contours of self-worth, the permissions they never knew they were allowed to give themselves. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because once you see the program, once you feel the shape of the cage, you can no longer pretend you're free. And freedom isn't found in rebellion alone. It's found in awareness, in learning to trace the origin of your fears, in asking, whose voice is this really? Every time you hear yourself shrink or hesitate or criticize your own longing, it's found in noticing the patterns that have always run your life and realizing they aren't yours. They were installed, and they can be uninstalled too. But unprogramming isn't about blame. Your caregivers were programmed too. The world they handed you was handed to them. You were shaped by the shape of their wounds. You inherited not just their language but their silence, not just their hopes but their helplessness. And so the lineage of programming continues generation after generation until someone, like you, begins to wake up, begins to notice the automatic scripts, begins to feel the itch of something more. That itch isn't confusion, it's your original self, stirring beneath the code, calling you home. That home was never far. It was simply buried, under expectations, labels, shame, performance. The child you were before the programming began is still in there. Not innocent, in a naive sense, but pure, untouched by distortion. That child didn't know how to please. That child didn't know how to perform. That child just was. Fully, expressively, unapologetically. And to reconnect with that part of you is to begin the process of deprogram, to reclaim your voice, your body, your truth. Not the truth they gave you, but the one that rises when all the noise goes quiet. It starts with noticing, with paying attention to the places where you're not free. The automatic no, the smile that hides a scream, the apology you offer just for existing. These are the footprints of the program. They show you where to look, and when you follow them, not with judgment but with curiosity, you begin to uncover the roots. You remember the first time you were taught to betray yourself, the first time you believed you were too much, the first time you dimmed your light to be accepted, and in that remembering, healing begins. Because here's the miracle. Once you see the program, you're no longer bound by it. You may still feel its pull. You may still hear its voice. But now there's space between the stimulus and the response. Space where a choice can be made. Space where you can say, no, that's not mine. And in that space your nervous system learns something new. Safety is not in the performance, it's in the presence. Worth is not in the approval, it's in the awareness. You start to reparent yourself, not as a project, but as a path. A sacred return to the version of you that was never broken, only buried. And what comes next is powerful. You begin to remember your sovereignty, the fire in your chest, the knowing in your gut, the clarity that doesn't scream but hums. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop outsourcing your permission. You start walking differently, not faster, not louder, but truer. Every step becomes a prayer. Every breath becomes a reclamation. You stop living as the program and start living as the presence behind it, the watcher, the chooser, the one who was never programmed, only wrapped in layers of forgetting. You were programmed before you had words, but now you have words. And not just any words, but your words. Words that liberate, words that affirm, words that speak life into the places you once silenced. And with each word you rewrite the code. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to remember who you were before you were told who to be. That remembering is your revolution. That remembering is your return. You are not broken, you are coded, and now you are decoding. Line by line, pattern by pattern, until all that remains is truth. Until all that remains is you. You thought school was about learning, about knowledge, about discovery and becoming educated. That's what you were told, wasn't it? That education would liberate your mind, prepare you for the world, make you capable, successful, smart. But somewhere deep inside, even as a child, you felt the tension. You felt the dullness, the restriction, the silent pressure to conform. You couldn't name it back then, but your body felt it. The invisible leash, the hollow rewards, the punishment of aliveness. The truth is, school didn't teach you how to think. It taught you how to follow, how to raise your hand for permission, how to memorize, not understand, how to comply, not question. It molded your mind not to expand but to fit. And what it fit into was a system, not a self. From the very beginning you were placed into rows, like data to be organized. Bells told you when to start, when to stop, when to speak, when to eat. You were taught to associate movement with disruption, stillness with obedience, curiosity with distraction. You were graded not for originality, but for your ability to regurgitate. You weren't asked to explore your own voice, you were trained to echo theirs. The silent lesson was woven into every worksheet, every multiple-choice test, every right answer. Don't think for yourself, just get it right. Not right by truth, right by standard, right by someone else's metric of control. And over time you learned the real lesson. What matters is not what you see, but what they approve of. You were rewarded for sitting still even when your soul screamed to move. You were rewarded for memorizing information you didn't understand as long as you could recite it on cue. You were praised for being polite instead of passionate, agreeable instead of alive, and when you dared to deviate, to ask too many questions, to color outside the lines, to challenge the narrative, you were corrected, disciplined, shamed, not always harshly, but enough to feel it. Enough to associate truth with risk, enough to associate authenticity with consequence. So you adjusted, you lowered your voice, you followed the rubric, and little by little, a system that claimed to teach you began instead to tame you. They didn't teach you how to think critically, they taught you how to pass. They didn't teach you how to feel deeply, they taught you how to perform. The entire system was not designed for your flourishing, it was designed for your conformity, to create a predictable product. A citizen, a worker, a cog, not a sovereign being, not a questioner of systems, not someone who might look at the world and say, wait, none of this makes sense, because that kind of person is dangerous to control. That kind of person is hard to program. So instead, they broke you gently. With grades, with comparison, with shame disguised as motivation. And then they told you that your value depended on how well you played the game. But what about your brilliance, your imagination, your intuition? What happened to the wild, undomesticated mind you had as a child, the one that saw magic in the mundane, that asked why without fear, that wanted to touch, taste, experiment, not to pass a test, but to experience life? That mind didn't disappear, it was covered, buried beneath years of structured thinking, beneath the fear of being wrong, beneath the conditioning that said, only speak if you know the answer. So you stopped speaking, you stopped asking, you stopped trusting your inner knowing. You began to outsource intelligence. You began to believe that the smart ones were the ones with titles, degrees, authority, and you, if you didn't fit, must not be smart. But here's what they didn't want you to know. True thinking can't be taught. It can only be remembered, reclaimed. Real thinking is not compliance, it's curiosity. It's the willingness to sit in discomfort. It's the courage to hold paradox. It's the rebellion of saying, maybe what I've been told is only part of the story. Real thinking is messy, it's emotional, it's non-linear. It doesn't fit into test forms or curriculum outline, and that kind of thinking threatens every system built on control. That kind of thinking leads to awakening. So of course, they built a school system that filtered it out. They built a system that taught you what to think, not how. That taught you what success looks like, not how to define it for yourself. That taught you how to compete, not how to connect. How to fear failure, not how to learn from it. How to prepare for jobs, not how to live a meaningful life. You were trained for productivity, not presence. Ability, not empathy. For performance, not purpose. And you were told this was intelligence. But now you're waking up. You're starting to question. You're beginning to remember the feeling of inner knowing, not the kind that's validated with applause, but the kind that resonates in your bones. The kind of knowing that says, I don't need permission to ask this question. I don't need a degree to see through the illusion. I don't need their system to validate my brilliance. That's the beginning of unlearning. That's the beginning of rewilding your mind. You see, your intelligence was never gone. It was just dormant. It's still there. Beneath the scripts, beneath the fear of being wrong, beneath the self-doubt that schools silently installed, That intelligence doesn't always speak in words. It speaks in insight, in synchronicity, in the way a poem moves you, or a question keeps tugging at your soul. It speaks in the feeling that something is missing, not in the world, but in your own expression of truth. You don't need to go back to school to find it. You need to come back to yourself. Because the world doesn't need more obedient thinkers. It needs awake ones. It needs people who can feel deeply and question fiercely, people who can sit with contradiction, who can ask inconvenient questions, who can see beyond the curriculum and into the mystery. People who know that intelligence isn't measured in grades, but in the ability to meet life with courage, creativity, and care. That kind of intelligence can't be trained. It can only be unleashed. So if you've ever felt that school failed you, it's because in many ways it did. It failed to see your essence. It failed to honor your uniqueness. It failed to teach you the most important skill of all, how to think for yourself. But the story doesn't end there, because now you get to unlearn. You get to strip away the layers of programming. You get to reclaim your mind. You get to redefine what learning means, not as memorization but as transformation, not as performance but as presence, not as accumulation but as embodiment. The truth is, everything you need to know is already within you, waiting to be activated, not taught. You don't need to go back to class. You need to sit in silence. You need to listen to your questions. You need to feel your curiosity. You need to follow the threads that light you up, that make you come alive. That's where real learning happens. Not in a building, but in being. In daring to be the kind of thinker the system couldn't contain. You were not born to obey. You were born to wonder, to break molds, to awaken. And now you are. You were taught to chase stability, to crave it, to shape your entire life around it. You were told that stability means security, and security means safety, and safety means peace. So you sought it in every way they told you to. You picked the job that came with benefits, not passion. You chose the path that looked respectable, not alive. You settled into routines, roles, and rhythms that promised consistency, even when your soul was screaming for more. You looked at chaos with fear and certainty with reverence. And somewhere along the way you began to believe that if you could just get everything under control, everything would be okay. But what no one told you is that the version of stability you were sold is not freedom. It's a cage built of comfort, paved with fear, lined with expectations that were never truly yours. This cage doesn't look like a prison from the outside. It looks like a perfectly curated life. A home with matching furniture, a schedule that never deviates, a paycheck that arrives on time, a relationship that checks all the boxes but leaves your heart untouched. It looks like safety because it's predictable. It looks like maturity because it's organized. It looks like wisdom because it avoids risks. But look deeper. Behind the carefully arranged exterior there's something missing. Vitality, wonder, aliveness. That spark that once made your chest ache with curiosity, that whisper that said, "There's more than this." You didn't lose it, you buried it. Under routine, under responsibility, under the quiet terror that if you let go of stability, everything would fall apart. You mistake this sense of control for peace, but peace doesn't come from control, it comes from coherence, from living in integrity with your aliveness. And deep down, you feel it. That quiet numbness that follows every safe decision, that subtle grief that echoes through your perfectly planned day, the sense that even though everything looks fine, something inside you is not breathing. That's not failure, that's the part of you that refuses to be tamed. That's your soul knocking on the walls of your stability, reminding you that safety and life are not the same thing. You were not born for maintenance, you were born for movement, growth, expansion, expression. The real you is not made of schedules and spreadsheets. The real you is wild, curious, brave. The real you wants to feel the edges of life, not manage them. But that self is dangerous to the system that sold you stability as salvation. Because a person who's alive is unpredictable. They ask hard questions, they make bold changes, They leave jobs, end marriages, break patterns, and a person who does that can't be controlled. So instead you were taught to equate stillness with virtue and change with recklessness, to choose what's known over what's true, to follow the path of least resistance even if it leads straight to a life that fits but doesn't feel. And here's the thing, your nervous system was conditioned for this. It's not just mental, it's biological. From a young age your body was taught to associate unfamiliarity with danger, to seek sameness as a survival strategy. So when you consider leaving the job, expressing the truth, taking the risk, you feel fear not because it's wrong, but because it's new. That fear is not a signal to stay. It's a signal to examine, to ask, is this fear protecting me or preventing me? Because safety, real safety, doesn't mean never feeling scared. It means being free to move even when you are. The cage of stability whispers a lie in your ear. If you stay here, you'll be safe forever. But safety isn't about walls. It's about connection to yourself, to your truth, to the intelligence moving through your body. You've spent so long outsourcing your stability to external structures, to routines, to titles, to relationships that gave you identity. But what happens when those structures crumble? What happens when the company closes, or the relationship ends, or the role shifts? You're left with yourself. And if you haven't built inner safety, the kind rooted in authenticity, self-trust, and presence, you'll feel like you've lost everything. That's the illusion of stability. It feels unshakable until it's shaken.